Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast. Today, we're talking about our SOA hunt and all the mishaps that came with that. It was an interesting week, to say the least, from a weather standpoint, and also just where we were at with the rut. Jacob, you had some interesting encounters. We're gonna get into it, break it down. But anyways, Jacob, how you doing?
Man, listen,
Looking forward to this.
Yeah, just
Looking
down
forward.
in the dumps, man.
Nick Adair told me that I need to revoke your free will on our next hunt and just be like, just tell Jacob he can't choose what he's doing. Just you got to put him where he needs to go. It'll be like father and son.
You're lucky.
I'll be like, you go sit over there, boy.
No.
You sit on top of this hill.
Listen, it was a rough time, guys. It was real rough. Yeah, we got a lot to talk about, and a lot of good lessons learned. Sometimes Andrew might make a better guide than a hunter. So
listen.
I
would have listen. I'd have been there. I had circumstances. I had to go to a funeral.
Don't be jumping ahead. Don't be jumping ahead.
But anyways,
we're gonna talk about it. But no, I mean, other than all those shenanigans that we're about to talk about, it's been going okay. Like we said, had the opportunity to tag out. It would be probably the biggest deer I've ever killed. Like I've hunted Iowa, and
now I'm very interested to hear what this buck has grown into since we last spoke about it. So when it happened, we talked about it, and if y'all been listening to the podcast, y'all know, like Jacob, like most of us, like a true deer hunter, the more time
what did I tell you?
Passes.
No,
we're gonna get to it. I'm not gonna say because I'm going to see what you say because I bet it's gonna be bigger. The more time that elapses between stories, the bigger the deer get. Classic deer hunt. That's how you know that you're a legit deer hunter because like that Tennessee buck that started out as just like a really big deer, suddenly within about 13 months turned into a 180-inch deer.
Now you're over-exaggerating. You are a terrible storyteller.
170. 100 for sure.
65 to 160.
I will. Okay, now I'm going to go on a mission. See, we need an AI thing. We have so many episodes now that we need to somehow plug in our episodes to an AI so I can just freaking search it because I don't have the time to go back and find it manually. But if somebody does have the time to go find this manually, I'll pay you $100.
The 180-inch, that has never come out of my mouth.
Okay.
In Tennessee.
So, all right, I'll give you that. You didn't say you did say 170.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to go find the original episode where we talked about that because this is during the podcast. This was like early.
I probably could find that in 10 minutes.
It was year 1, year 2. Yeah,
I can find the episode. I don't know if I could find the spot where I listened.
Yeah, you got to find the spot. But then there's episodes over the course of the next 2 to 3 years where it comes up randomly, and before long, this deer is 170 inches straight up. So, anyways. Like most deer hunters, tends to exaggerate a little bit. So, anyways, we're gonna get to that. I completely lost my train of thought.
Let me tell you something. We should have done that scoring competition with old Tommy, and see how close you got to some of those numbers compared to what I got to some of those numbers. Because I typically underscore deer if I'm looking at.
Well, that's now.
I'm just telling you. Listen, booger sugar. All right, so
that now. Now, also,
Accurate.
This is the same exact guy who you can go back to an episode with Anthony where he's talking about his first buck being like a busted up 10-point, and Anthony found the picture of the buck, and it was literally a 3-point.
All right,
it was barely not a spike.
All right.
He's like, he's this cool busted up 10-point.
That 12-year-old mind raising
guy.
I don't even know if I still even have that deer's rack. I hadn't seen
that
photo. I hadn't seen that photo in years.
But the point is, there's a long journey between a forked spike, basically. He's a spike on one side, a fork on the other. Barely a fork. You can barely hang a ring on that sucker. And he goes from that to a busted up 10-point. Like, what? So anyways, all right, let's get into this SOA hunt. So the SOA system in Alabama, special opportunity areas, it's essentially our version of like a quota hunt or a lottery draw.
Like Georgia does. I think Mississippi does. I mean, Tennessee does them. A lot of states do these kind of hunts.
All the hunts are draw only, and you can't hunt the property unless you draw it. So
and you only have like 3 or 4 days to hunt it. So it's not like you draw it and you can hunt the whole season. It is a block of time that you are designated to be able to be on that property, and that is it.
Yes, and the state does a really good job with them. Admittedly, I mean they got very stringent antler restrictions that they will absolutely fine you over. I personally know people who have been absolutely, smacked with fines
Yep.
over shooting a deer. Well, a buddy of ours, I was talking to him last week on this particular SOA. The rule is inside spread of 16 inches or a main beam length of 18 inches.
Yep.
He shot this deer.
Preferably both, plus being 4.5 years old.
Yes. So we're going to get into that later. But like he shot a deer that was 15 3/4 inches inside spread, missed it by a 1/4 inch. They fined him $350.
Oh, what about the main beam?
I don't know about the main beam. It was the obviously it didn't make the main beam because it's one or the other. It's not both.
Yeah.
They want you to kill one with both, which we're going to get into. But anyways, so really stringent, which it's produced some really, really good deer on these places. And pretty much all the SOAs I've hunted or know people who have hunted have all been really good, like the whole gamut. I know people who've hunted most of them. I think there's one or two. I don't know anyone personally who's hunted. But they're all really good. And we hunted one last year. That's where we killed, we doubled up on bucks. And that video's on our YouTube channel. It was a really fun hunt. I missed a really good deer on that hunt, and then I ended up killing a 10-point. Jacob ended up killing a big, what was he, a 7-point or 8-point?
8-point.
So he killed a nice 8-point. We're actually going to pick those suckers up next week from the taxidermist. So anyways, I drew it last year. You drew it this year, and it's the same SOA that we hunted last year, but last year we hunted two particular units, and we were staying in camp. And the two guys that were staying in camp with us, they were kind of sharing this like lodge that a guy rents out. And we were down there, and they hunted the two units north of us. They had joined our units. So we were talking to them all week, kind of hearing what they saw. And Jacob draws this year. We get our unit assignments, and it's those two units. So we call up the guy, and we're like, hey, we just drew your units from last year. And he sent us a bunch of pins, and he gave us advice on what to look for. And we didn't even actually go to the scouting day. I think that we were maybe hunting in Georgia.
No, I was hunting Alabama, different portion of Alabama.
Oh, yeah. So we didn't even go to the scouting day, which normally is like against everything that I'm like, you know. But we were so familiar with the area that I felt like we would be good to go because it's not a very complicated hunt. What?
I'm trying to think if I want to say it or not.
Uh-oh.
So there's a guy this week on this hunt who killed a deer in one of our units that we had last year. Killed a really nice deer. Actually, when I first saw it, I thought it was the deer you missed, but it's not that deer.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a really good deer. And he killed it. We had two of units. The unit we killed our deer in, he killed it in the other unit.
Oh, like this hunt going on right now?
Yeah, right now.
I think I talked to him.
Killed it yesterday.
He messaged me on Facebook.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Like I think it's a really, really heavy horn.
I haven't seen it yet. I haven't texted him. But also the guy who was in camp with us this week, Jason, when we were there, he shot one the first 2 hours of the hunt. I'm waiting for a picture of
camp with us.
The guy who was there the first night.
Where?
In camp? At Tommy's place.
Oh, yeah, because he's out there.
Yeah.
Oh, he killed a buck?
Yeah, he killed one. He texted me. He said, I hate to shoot one within the first 2 hours, but it's a good one.
Oh, did he get a photo?
I haven't got a photo yet.
Oh,
I'm like,
man.
come on.
Oh, okay. All right. Jason getting it done, baby.
Yeah, come on with it.
Dude.
So, So, it's such a good property. And, we learned a lot from this hunt. But anyways, to just jump right into it, we go down there, and this is the timing of our hunt happened right when, not the big cold front that just rolled through, but there was a storm front before that just dropped like a ton of rain.
Yeah, I think it dropped. I think temperatures dropped over 30 degrees.
Yeah, like
from
huge
pre-front to post-front.
Yeah, huge cold front that dropped a ton of rain. Again, not this deep freeze that we just went into, but the one before that. That's the timing of our hunt. And sure enough, we get down there and it's just violently raining all night. But by the time we got there, it was pretty. Everything was clear. It was windy, but it was clear. And we go out, and how would you describe the habitat in our units?
So the habitat in our units is actually a lot different from our previous units. A lot less topography kind of laid out on the units, but also probably pretty good diversity, to be honest. To be honest, some of the best habitat I've seen in Alabama. And being able to hunt in public land.
Yeah.
I mean, just really well-managed pines, okay? And let me tell you something. Let me tell you a little segment on pines. I had a biology teacher back in high school that, old school guy. He was Willie Nelson's twin brother. I'm talking about spitting. If you think of what Willie Nelson looks like, this is what this gentleman looked like. I mean, he played guitar, played harmonica. Anyway, and just
It's a hard word.
Yeah, I know it really is for us Alabama folks. Roll Tide. So, dude, it was he. I remember in class one day he talked about how bad habitat wise pines were compared to hardwoods. Okay, and he was talking more so from like a kind of closed canopy forest.
Yeah.
But I'm like, closed canopy hardwoods, yeah, there's mass that's produced. And I learned this a little bit later on, and later on, like after high school into college, started hunting and stuff and talking to, actual biologists about some of this stuff. But I remember him talking so badly about how bad habitat pines are. And unmanaged pines definitely are terrible habitat, okay?
Yeah.
But when you have highly managed pines that are being select cut, they're being burned, it is unbelievable. Just the amount of cover, food, everything in one area, okay? And that's exactly how a large portion of our property set up, or our unit set up, where you had, they were pine trees, not quite so big you could get you can't get a climber on, but there were some. If you randomly picked a tree in the dark, you might not be able to get a climber on. I mean, really big, beautiful pines that had been almost to the point of being a savanna cut, not that quite sporadic trees, but plenty of sunlight coming through. Excellent cover underneath. They're burning it. A lot of the cover in some of the areas is, chest head high, different grasses, different forbs, briars, a lot of greenbrier, just everything underneath that just screams deer, okay? And it also screams, fairly decent turkey poult habitat when it comes to like getting poults in there, because you could still, again, the cover wasn't so dense that a turkey or quail can't run underneath all that stuff. But it looked unbelievable. I mean, just it's one of those places you could climb up a tree, and once you climbed up, you could see pretty decent, through some of that stuff, but a deer could still hide in it pretty well. And I'm like, this screams big buck. Just screams big buck. But you had to mix that, had a little bit of clear cut activity as well in this unit.
Yep.
Younger clear cut, which I had some success seeing some smaller bucks on, which we're going to talk about as well. But just a mix of all kinds of stuff. It was mostly, though, where we're at, pines. A little mix of hardwoods mixed in. A lot of water oaks. I found a couple spots that had just a ton of water oaks that were still dropping or had some fresh acorns on the ground with some feed sign underneath it. And just, a little bit of everything. Literally, if I could draw up like some of the best looking habitat I've hunted, this would be it.
Yeah, definitely. And also, one weird thing about the SOAs is we almost have to like unlearn some things when we go to an SOA, because we're so used to hunting higher pressure, whether it's a hunting club or a lease.
Oh my God, yeah.
Or a public land. We're like pretty much everywhere that we hunt is like very high pressure. So we're having to like be really creative with where we're going and getting in off the wall spots. And the deer are forced into areas where if it was a lower pressure situation, they might not be in that area.
Never be in that area.
Yeah. So when you go to an SOA like this, and we especially learned this last year, it was nice being able to hunt one 2 years in a row with me drawing and then you drawing, because those, like, we kind of snowballed and learned a lot really quickly. And what we learned is that like when you try really hard like that, you're trying too hard. You're walking yourself out of deer. You're overthinking it. And at the end of the day, like, these deer are acting like how deer are supposed to act.
You know who I'm talking about murder some bucks on an SOA?
Who?
Mr. Ben George.
Oh, he would. He would. I told Benny, I was like, hey, if you're not putting in for this, you need to start like yesterday.
But I want to talk a little bit more about that. So that is something, again, we learned that last year. We try to go to these off-the-wall spots, and you're like, why the hell are we seeing deer? Well, they're all around the food plots. They're all around the road beds. Because the cool thing about these properties, and this is the only SOA I've ever been on. You've been on a couple different ones, but it seems like they have fairly decent road access on the properties. They have like boundary roads. They have interior little road beds that you can drive trucks down, side by sides, 4-wheelers, all that kind of stuff. And they keep them pretty well maintained. And typically on a lot of the public land that we hunt, yeah, you can definitely have success close to some of the road beds, but a lot of times we're trying to get it, like you're saying, we're trying to get into like more like defined habitat edges and all this kind of stuff, and you definitely can do that. But when it came back to like us stepping foot on this property, I felt like we were attempting to do that early on.
Yeah.
Or we were like, we had that mindset, and then we get there and we're like, dude, forget that. Let's just like literally like we had a couple really good road beds through our property, and let's get in a spot where we can see into some of that dense cover. Okay, those select cut pines, but also be able to watch the road bed, watch everything, and just see what kind of almost from like a a little bit more of an observation spot that if you were looking on public land, there's probably going to be a lot of pressure in those areas because they're, I mean, literally in one of the spots, I think I pulled up with the truck, you hopped out, climbed a tree 10 yards off the side of the roadbed, which again is perfectly fine in this place because nobody else has access to it. So we can hunt on the roadbed interior to our property. Anywhere on that property and on that unit we can sit. And I dropped you off on that roadbed. I've drive the truck, I think 250 yards down, parked the truck. I walk another 150 yards to my tree, which is 5 yards off the roadbed. Where we can watch the roadbed, we can watch back through the pines the whole 9 yards. And yeah, let's just say it was a little crazy. Well, more so for you than me, but
yeah, we when we got there, we talked about what should we do, and pretty much the first thing we did, like the rain stopped, we got access to our unit at noon. We could start hunting at noon, and we went out there, and I think we both agreed. We were like, let's just drive all the roads.
Yeah,
right here, right off the bat. It's super windy. I was like, let's just slow roll down all these roads, look for trails, look for tracks. That rain stopped at like after daylight that morning. So any track that you find on that road is a daylight track. So so it's a really good opportunity. So we're like, let's slow roll these roads. Let's see where the sign's at, see where the crossings are at, see what the habitat looks like, which we already kind of knew what it looked like from talking to the guy that hunted it the year before.
Well,
and
somewhat, but I'll be honest, the way he described it was not the way I thought it was going
well,
to
he
look
sent
like.
me pictures of the pines, and it was exactly what I expected.
Okay.
I knew going into it that section of pines, I didn't really want to leave it. Like I was like, we're just gonna hunt that the whole time because it looks that good based on the pictures and everything he sent me and describing it. And so yeah, we went and slow rolled through those pines, and instantly we're like, oh yeah, this is it. Nice road beds going through the pines. Actually, he ended up killing a buck there, the guy who hunted it the year before. And he killed it where you hunted that first afternoon. And when we were slow rolling through there wasn't a ton of tracks on the roads yet because I don't think they had moved that good. And the roads were kind of gravelly, so they were hard to pick up tracks in. But there were nice trails crossing, like plenty of nice trails. And the wind is just ripping through there. I mean, trees swaying. And after driving through the unit, we decided, we're like, hey, let's just hunt these road beds in here. Because, again, you can hunt into your road beds of your unit because there's nobody else in your unit. You've got, like, how much would you say, like 500 acres to yourself?
Yeah, I mean, all the units are a little bit different. But, I mean, yeah, they range from, like, a small one probably 350 to 400 acres, and a big one's maybe 650.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, they're for a guy, now if you're coming from public land, you're like, man, that doesn't sound like a lot of acreage, but you are the only people out there. It's just you and your buddy, whoever you take as a guest. And the cool thing is, when we're talking about hunting pressure, like, yeah, these units get hunted, almost every other week or something like that, but they're only hunted for 3 days. And there's only so much two guys can do or two hunters can do in 3 days on a property.
Yeah.
It's not like you're going everywhere. So there is a ton of it that is like very unpressured. And then also we learned they don't hunt every unit every week. They it also almost seems like they rotate certain units. So it's like, say there's 20 units on a property. They're not going to have necessarily 20 groups of hunters out there. They're going to have a couple every week that don't have hunters on them and kind of give them a rest, which is even better. I mean, and man, I don't know if they're all like this. I think probably a decent amount of these SOAs are like this. When I tell you, these deer were as unpressured as any deer I've ever seen in Alabama. These are like some of the first deer I've ever seen that they weren't looking up in trees. You'd have some get down. I had two different bucks that weren't like bumping does or anything like that. Nothing crazy, just kind of feeding around, get directly down limit me and dropping milkweed at 40 yards. And it's just dropping right down to them. Never bust me. I ain't using any scent control. I probably smell terrible out there, okay? And it's like they are so laid back, it is insane. It really is. And it kind of goes back to like, stop overthinking things. Like we had a listener reach out to us that drew another unit down there. And he's like, hey man, I got pulled as an alternate. It's like, I didn't know until like a week out from the hunt. What should I do? And I started dropping him pins and like in his unit and like areas to look at. He's like, I would never thought about those. Cause he was thinking like us, like, get in the thicket, get in like the most hard to reach spot. And I'm like, I promise you on these hunts, you don't do that.
Yeah.
I mean, you might have success. But if you hunt more on areas, especially on some of these gun hunts where you have a visual advantage, you're in and around really good bedding cover, but you don't have to get necessarily in the cover in order to get an opportunity. I'm like, you'll probably have more success, see a lot more deer, and have a better opportunity to kill a deer.
Yeah, definitely. And that was our mindset going into day one because as we were driving through those pines, we're like, man, you could just sit like on the roadbed, basically getting a tree, like 1 or 2 trees back off of the road, and you're going to be able to watch. If one pops out in the road, you're going to have an open shot, but also you're going to be able to see way out through these pines in between the rows and be able to shoot into that too. So that's what we did. You dropped me at my tree, and I literally climbed a tree right there on the edge of the road. And when I got up in it, I'll put a video of this in the video podcast on YouTube. When I got up in the tree, I had a straightaway on both sides of me at the road. I could see about 150 yards either direction. And then I could also see way out through the pines in front of me. And man, when I got up, I was like, oh, this is it, dude. This is it. And you went and got in a similar spot, about 400 yards down.
Yeah.
And you parked the truck right between us, and I could see the truck.
I could see the truck too.
Yeah, I mean, I was sitting there looking at it, and I was like, man, if one walks out right there in that bend, I don't know if I could shoot it without hitting the truck, because you parked it a little too close to me. And so I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. So, I mean, dude, I don't think I was up for very long before I saw the first doe either.
No, because
there's like a perfect, and there's old shooting houses on this place.
Yeah.
So it used to be a hunting club back in the day, and so it's got a bunch of nice shooting houses on it. Some of them are broken down. Some of them are like brand new.
Yeah, and some of them are in spots like, what the? I'm like, maybe 20 years ago
they must have had a food.
They had a food plot there, but like right now that sucker is like in the thicket.
Yeah, this particular shooting house was like up in the thicket, and it was like, I don't know, 50 yards off of the road in the pines. And when I got up in my tree, you couldn't see this because the cover in these pines, when you're standing on the ground, is like head high roughly. But when you get up, you can see into it really, really well. It's a lot of stemmy cover. It's not super grassy, so you can see through it pretty good. But there's patches of grassy stuff. And way out there about 120 yards from me, there's like a patch of just yellow grass. And I think it might be where a food plot used to be. And I was looking at that patch. I'm like, man, if a buck walks through there, it's going to be absolutely perfect. I got a perfect rest right here. I got between 2 limbs on this tree, because one downside of hunting like that is I've got a road straightaway on either side of me, and then I got all this stuff in front of me. But I'm covering such a wide area that unless a deer walks out in a very specific area, I'm gonna have to move quite a bit to be able to get on it. And get steady, because I got to rest in a very certain way, but just because of how windy it is. The offhand shooting, not an option. I mean, this tree is I'm surfing up there. It is swaying big time. So I was like, well, I'm just going to get between those 2 limbs. So again, using the one stick, I have like a lot of freedom of like where I can get in that tree. So I climb up to the canopy, and where the first limbs start, and there's these 2 limbs coming out, and I get right between them, and it's perfect. And if something was on my offside, I could literally grab my rope and turn and sit my butt on the limb, and literally sit on the limb and then rest on the other limb. So it was actually a really good setup, but I had to move a lot, so I wanted to be in that cover just in case. And yeah, dude, I mean, I hadn't been up long, and then a doe walks right through that grass patch.
Yeah, 'cause I think I started climbing the tree at 150, and you were probably already set up by that point. And it was like, I mean, early. I mean, so Andrew, one thing I learned about Andrew, so you weren't in our other river bottom hunt, where we had communications going on back, like, hey, if you see something, told the group, if you see something, you text us in the group and let us know like what the deer movement was looking like. Andrew doesn't do that. He don't tell you nothing until you reach out to him. Like, hey, man, I just saw one. Oh, man, I've already seen 4. Well, thanks for letting me know, man. They're moving. Because I was responding to some messages going back and forth, more like business messages. And I look up. This is before you before you ever text me saying you're seeing all these deer. I look up, and I just see out in front of me at 80 yards, just a sapling getting thrashed. I mean, this sucker's shaking, and it's windy, but I'm like, and I look and I see a brown bottom. I'm like, oh God, it's a buck. And I see white antlers. I'm like, are we gonna kill one? I mean, the first 30 minutes in the tree, dude, it's like 2:30, and I'm looking. And I'm like, and he raises his head up, and he's just a dinky little 2-year-old. And that's what they tell you, at least on some of these SOAs. At least on these SOAs, like, dude, day one within the first hunt, you're gonna see a couple young bucks. So just heads up.
Yeah.
And he raised his head up from home, man. He's like a dinky 5-point, but he's just wearing this tree out. And I text you, I was like, hey, man, I got a buck making a rub in front of me. He's like, oh, yeah, man, I've already seen 2 does and a buck. And I'm like, well, thanks for telling me, dude.
No, that's not true. That's not.
I'm looking at the text message.
Pull it up. That's not how it happened. I saw the first one, and I think I might have been texting you when I saw the second one, because the first one walked right through that grass patch, and there's like this one lane of pines, and these again, these are thinned pines, so all of the pine trees are in perfect rows. And so if you position yourself right, you can see straight down one of those rows. And she walks through that grass patch, and she ends up coming out into that row and turning and walking straight up towards you, because that row went basically directly towards you. And I watched her for a minute, and I think that's when I texted you.
No, that's right. I'm gonna read it now. I said I got a buck making in front of me making a rub at 80 yards, and you're like, well, you said same, which I thought you had a buck in front of you making a rub because you said same. Just watch a doe work through the pines heading your way.
Same. No, you said I'm set up.
Oh, okay.
Golly, reading is not your strong suit, Jacob.
All right.
I'm telling you.
Anyway,
she goes right towards Jacob. I think I was texting you, or I just got done texting you, and I look, and another doe just pops out. And these does are like coming from my direction, so they're clearly bedded out in front of me, and I just like they're bedded somewhere, and I'm seeing them as they stand up because I haven't seen them cross the road yet. And she starts walking off. What time was that?
Yeah, so it's 2:15 when I saw that buck, and you were saying 2:15 when you were seeing that doe. And let me just read something, because guys, I don't know if you've hunted with a buddy before, but like you think you're off to a hot start and it slows down, and your buddy keeps seeing deer, and you get a little depressed.
Oh, are you gonna read the text?
This is Jacob. Okay, I got a little depressed at this moment. So me and Andrew going back and forth, and he's like, "Oh man, we're off to a hot start. 2:18, 2:45s, two more does, all of them alone." And I'm asking about where they're at in the pines. And then he keeps going. 3 o'clock, 3:05. Lone doe just crossed the road 40 yards from the truck. And another doe at 3:20. And I'm like, I ain't seen nothing. I seen this one buck at 2:15, okay? And it just keeps going. It just keeps going.
And then a buck. And then a doe.
Yeah, and just keeps going. He's like, oh, and another one at 3:21. So 2 minutes later, sees another deer. Oh, and a buck at 3:25. 4 minutes later, and I'm like, "What the hell?"
Andrew knows how to pick a spot, son.
So, anyways, it just kept going like that. So one thing I want to bring up with this is, last year we were hunting together. Like I was filming you, so like you only. If you like you and your buddy are hunting, I mean, right smack dab with each other, okay? That's still technically what you would call like one man day because you're together. It's only one observation. When you have two guys out there and you're able to separate, it's counting 2 man days. So you're able to see 2 different observations from 2 different spots and to see how the deer or you're moving. And this is a huge, huge aspect of like why I believe you should have hunting buddies when you're out there hunting, even if you're a few hundred yards apart.
Yeah.
Because you may think it's super slow where you are, no rutting activity, nothing. Your buddy could be 250 yards away like Andrew, or actually you're 400 yards away up the roadbed from him. And he might be seeing like 11 deer, okay? Mm-hmm. And you've seen one. And you think the spot sucks, but you're just 400 yards off the X, which will come into play later in this podcast.
And later in the hunt, actually, the roles reversed, and I had a hunt where, you were seeing a lot more than me. But I've killed 4 deer this season. I shot a doe on opening day of bow season in Bama. I shot 2 bucks in Arkansas.
Oh, you about to...
And then I shot one of my target bucks at 6 point on opening day of Bama's gun season.
And then this hunt, so
I'd killed 4 deer
before this hunt.
So I was like, I don't really know if I'm going to shoot a doe or not. Because, I mean, like, make no mistake, we eat a lot of deer meat in our house. Mm-hmm. But I was like, I could use another one. But I'm still planning on killing a buck. So, like, I don't want to kill, like, 7 deer if I'm not going to use 7 deer. I mean, I'll give some of it away, obviously. Like, my in-laws, they always want some deer meat. And I know other people who will want it. But I'm not the type where I'm just like, if I'm good on my freezer, I'm not going to go out and just wax a bunch of deer. Mm-hmm. Unless I'm on a property that has, like, a management objective. Yeah. Then I'll go out and do that. But it's like my hunting club, we don't have like a doe problem out there, so I'm not like super eager to just go start nailing does out there. But if I get invited to a property where someone's like, "Hey, I'm trying to kill does," then I'll go kill does. Well, this property, they're trying to kill does. They're in the emails and everything. They're like, "Hey, you can kill 3 does a day, or you can kill 3 does out here on your hunt. You can kill all 3 of them in a day," which is different from the norm in the state. You're only if I'm just hunting my club or a WMA, you can only shoot 1 doe per day. Out here, you can shoot 3 per day because they're trying to lower that population down. And
3 deer total, and you can take them all in one day.
Yeah,
3 does. Now, and that plays a factor because going into this hunt, I'm like, dude, I want to shoot a couple does. Mm-hmm. Like, I've killed the 2 Alabama bucks so far this year. And I'd like some more deer meat as well. Plus, I've got a couple people that's been asking for deer meat, and I'm like, dude, I'm gonna if I get the opportunity to shoot some does, especially if they're like They're not gonna be a hassle to deal with. We're just
Yeah.
getting a little lazy hunting here. All right, not necessarily some like traditional public land hunting.
Well,
I told Andrew, I'm like, dude, if one comes out in the roadbed right there, freaking hammer it, okay?
Yep.
And you keep telling me doe. I'm like, what? At one point, I text you, I'm like, why aren't you shooting? Why do I not hear a gunshot? And you kept saying like that, they were back in some cover, and I get that. It'd be kind of a little invasive, grabbing one and getting out. And then all of a sudden, so I'm sitting there, dude. I forgot what time. Actually, I'll look at what time.
Well,
it was.
before you get to that, I saw, I don't know how many. I'd seen like 10 deer or something, and I had out of all of them that I'd seen, I think I'd seen like 7 at this point, and only 2 of them had crossed the road.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them are just milling around out in the pines, and the 2 that did cross the road, they were far enough out. And it was, again, windy enough where I was like, I just don't really know if I want to try to take that poke. It was like 100 some odd yards down, and I would have to turn pretty far. And just with how windy it was, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm going to wait and see if one comes out like right beneath me, because there's one thing about this pine thicket is it's somewhat monotonous, like how pine thickets can be. It's pine trees and cover underneath. And so what I was looking for in that situation is an interior edge of some kind that'll guide that deer movement.
Mm-hmm.
And in this particular spot, the reason I wanted to hunt it is because there was like a low spot that was kind of running down through those pines, and that low spot had saplings in it, like sweet gum, all kinds of stuff growing, and these saplings are like 25 feet tall or so. So also they're serving as a little bit more of a windbreak.
Mm-hmm.
And some of these deer actually got in that sapling thicket and bedded down, and they're bedding like 30 yards from me.
Yep.
And about that time, I saw 2 does come through the pines following that sapling thicket. They got into that sapling thicket, and then a buck comes out. When I first saw the buck, he kind of got me going a little bit, because he was a rack deer. He's actually looked pretty similar to my Arkansas 8-point this year.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't quite a legal deer on the SOA, but he was just a really pretty nice buck. And he followed those does into that thicket, and I kind of lost him for a second. And
that was at 325.
Yep, 325.
Now, I'm going to tell my side real quick. Okay.
Yep.
So at 325, I'm like, when is Andrew going to shoot a doe? Okay, because I'm ready to put a doe on the truck. Okay, we got the game cart, we got the rack, we got everything we need. I'm sitting there, ain't seen nothing, getting wind blown, get good wind burn going up in the tree, and all of a sudden I hear ka-doom! And dude, when I tell you, I physically laughed out loud. I started smiling, and I actually got a little Jacob chuckle going on, because I'm like, oh, there's a dead doe. I'm like, I'm pretty sure he didn't kill a bug, but I'm like, I'm pretty sure he shot a doe. And I text him right afterwards. I'm like, about time, LOL, and then called you. And I was like, you shot a doe, right? He's like, yeah. I'm like, okay, because if you would have shot a buck, I'm like, damn, because I had my chance to be able to. Because you asked me what I want to do. I'm like, well, you sit that spot. I go sit the spot a little bit further down the roadbed. And if you would have shot a big buck right there, I would have been like, dang.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, when we got, because I knew that was a good spot. And I was like, hey, it's your hunt. Like, you want to hunt here? And you're like, no, you can have it. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to argue. And so that buck ended up getting into that sapling thicket. And there was, I think at that point, 3 does had walked into it and bedded. So it's kind of hard to keep everything straight of how many deer I've seen it. It's between 7 and 10 at this point.
Yeah.
And so he goes in there and he bumps, I think 4 does ran out of it. So I think there was an extra one in there that maybe had been there the whole time. And he bumps them out. He's grunting, he's being a little douchebag, chasing all these does around. They clearly,
teenager.
they clearly want nothing to do with him.
Yeah.
And he's just kind of harassing them. And this one doe comes out of that sapling thicket, and she walks about 25 yards off the edge of the road, and she's walking broadside through that thick cover. And I get up on her, and I flip the safety, and I'm like, it's like 325, and this buck's bumping her. I'm like, no, I'm not going to shoot her right there. Like, if I'm going to shoot a doe, at this point, I'm like, I just don't think I'm going to shoot a doe unless she literally walks underneath me. And so she moves through, the buck moves off, and I'm not there. It's not very long. I'm looking around. I think in between that, I see another one cross the road, maybe. And I'm just kind of looking around. I'm really scanning hard through these pines, trying to look. And I just happened to look down, and I'll be danged if at like 14 yards right below me, there's just a doe standing in the road. Don't know where she came from. She's just standing there, and she's on my strong side. And she could not be in a better spot. And I'm like, honey, you screwed up big time. And so keep in mind, there's two things in factor here. one, the deer on this place are small, like their body, just small body sizes on average, a lot smaller than what we're used to. And two, I'm one sticking, and I'm pretty far up this tree.
So you're looking down on
I'm
the
looking
deer.
down on her, so I'm way up this tree, and I'm like looking at her, and at first I'm like, isn't that a fawn? Like I can't really tell, and I'm like really trying to study her. I'm looking at her head, making sure she doesn't have like a fawn face or anything like that.
Explain that.
Fawn face is like it's what I call it. It's just where they have like a really short snout. Their head looks really round. They look like Bambi. I mean, legit, like their face is just really small, and it's really noticeable on like a young fawn, especially when they're standing next to a like mature doe, like that long muzzle. It's fairly obvious. So who's calling me from Bay Minette? Anyways. Making sure she doesn't have that fawn face, and I mean, I watched her for probably like 2 or 3 minutes. She was just, looking around. She was real cautious. She was like looking up and down the road. She kind of jumped a few times. Not that she was aware of me. My wind was perfect, and she didn't even think to look up because she would have had to look so far up to see me.
Break her neck.
Yeah, she had to break her neck to look at me. I think it was so windy. She was a little bit on edge. And finally, she just turned broadside. I'm like, yeah, I think that's a good doe. I'm gonna shoot her. And finally, she turns perfectly broadside, and so yeah, I shoot her, and she runs off and dies. And I'm like, sweet. And she runs off, and I see her fall, so pressure's off. Like I like seeing them fall. And I'm sitting there for a minute, and I'm kind of trying to decide what to do because I'm like, I could just sit here and see what else walks out, but there's a couple things like in factor here, and it was really. The wind was like kind of messing with me because a lot of these deer I'd seen way through the pines, I wasn't going to take a poke at a doe with the wind how it was through all that cover and everything. But I'm like, if a buck comes out, like I'll definitely take the shot. I think I can make the shot, but it's a difficult shot to make. And the more I sat there and thought about it, I was like, you know what? I might see one here, but I don't know if I'm going to hunt the same exact tree tomorrow, and we haven't scouted the property at all. So I'm like, I got like an hour left. I've already got a deer on the ground. I'm going to go grab her, drag her to the road real quick, and then I'm going to slip hunt the fire breaks and other roads around these pines and get a better idea of what we're looking at for tomorrow. And so I end up doing that. I get down, go grab the doe, drag her out. She was a fully grown doe. She ended up weighing 112 pounds. And I go hit the fire break and start walking the fire break between these pines and some hardwoods, and it's like scrape, 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 scrape. And these scrapes look like, I mean, they're as smooth as a dinner plate from that rain. Nothing has worked them since the rain that morning. So I was like, okay, I take that as a good thing. I'm like, these things are overdue. And also now we got a clean slate, so we're going to be able to run through here really quick tomorrow and see if they've been worked and have a general pulse of what's going on. So I run down through that, scout a bunch of edges that we were kind of interested in, and then end up making it back to the truck. You end up not seeing anything else. We get down, and just to move it along, that rain had flooded a little bit. This is all river bottom stuff, so it's all like very wet, low creek bottom, swampy stuff. And the creek was out of its banks a little bit, but nothing crazy. Like nothing was flooded out. So we leave and we get a plan together of what we want to do that next morning. And then we show up the next morning and we're like, oh, that water rose a little bit. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. So, yeah, got the whole doe taken care of. By the way, one thing we missed a little bit. When we went to the skinning shed and got the deer all cleaned up and, got to see some of the deer, because there was quite a few deer that got killed that afternoon.
I think everybody in that shed was a listener.
Everybody. There was like 6 people in there, and they all listen or watch the podcast, which is pretty cool.
That was awesome. It was great meeting all you guys.
One of the listeners, I can't remember his name, he shot a really nice 8-point.
Great.
Really nice deer. And 2 listeners, I think, shot 4 does total, like between the 2 of them.
Yeah, I mean, and another one killed a just huge hog.
Giant pig. And the funny thing is, the other guy that was with him was like, man, I missed one. He's like, we didn't think that one was that big when we shot it because I shot and missed one like an hour beforehand, and it was considerably larger. And the one they shot, live weight was probably like right around 210 pounds. 210 pounds. This big boar, big old head. Like all of his weight was in his shoulders and his head. It was gigantic. Yeah. And
the listener that shot that big 8-point, this kind of ties in. Most of these units on the SOAs will have like 5 quote unquote wildlife openings, which could sometimes they're a food plot, sometimes they're not. They alternate them year to year. So at least on our unit, we had 2 food plots. And then we had other wildlife openings that maybe they were a food plot last year, but this year instead of making it a food plot, they like strip disked it and burned it, and so it's old field, so it's just grown up stuff. The listener that shot that big 8-point shot it on one of those, and that's one thing the biologist was saying to everyone. He was like, "Hey, if you go to a food plot, quote unquote, like it shows a food plot on the map, and you get there and it's just a grown up field, don't be discouraged. They will walk out in that." And so that guy ended up killing one in a area like that, which is pretty interesting.
Well, so the next morning, the whole 9 yards, we kind of wake up, get all our stuff ready. Another great thing, hunting out there, last year we really were like kind of cheating daylight a little bit and getting out there like right around gray light and kind of slipping into spots to kind of check out. This time we kind of had, like, I had an area in mind that I was really interested in, getting on the backside of a younger pine thicket, probably 6-year-old pines maybe, and get into a block of woods. You were going to go back to like that scrape line on that fire break. And we go out that morning, and this one little spot that we got to drive across on the unit coming off like one of our roads is like just a little low spot going through some timber that I think there might have been just a little bit of water right there the day before when we got there on Tuesday. And the next day, which would have been Wednesday, going through that spot, I think we had to cross like 50 yards of water.
Yeah.
Nothing bad, I took note of it, but I was like, it ain't terrible. It's not, maybe up to like it might have been 8 inches deep, something like that, driving across. Well, we parked the truck, we parked the truck. I grabbed my stuff out because I was going to walk off one direction. You were going to take the truck and drive around to your spot and then walk in. So I do that, grab all my stuff. We're wearing rubber boots, being down one of these bottoms. So get all my stuff together. I start hiking out. You drive off. And I mean, I don't go 50 yards, and I was going to take another fire break down to this area where it was a pretty good long walk back in there, but it's really close to another road bed. I just didn't want to go through that road bed, and if we went through that road bed, I could have walked through that road bed, through that pine thicket, and then had to go through some pretty gnarly briars for like 40 yards and get to the tree and then climb the tree up. Well, I'm just going to come in from the backside, slip in. Plus, after my hunt, depending on how it goes, I'll have a lot to be able to scout back to the truck. I don't get 50 yards from the truck, and there's water all over this logging road, this fire break. And I'm like, I didn't think much about it. I'm like, oh, that's all good. And then I started realizing, I'm walking. It's like halfway up my road boot. And I start walking. I'm like, man, I got to cross a creek at some point. And the creek from like where I'm at, the creek's like 80 yards away.
Yeah.
And if it's already like halfway up my boot, like I don't know how I'm going to be able to cross it because we didn't bring waders, chest waders, hip waders, nothing like that. And I keep going. I go for another 100 yards. And it starts getting like almost to the top of my boot on that road bed. So I start I start side hilling or, start getting up on a little bit higher ground, start walking. And I'm like, dude, there's no way I'm going to be able to cross this in rubber boots. There's just no way. So I'm like, I'm going to bounce. I'm going to go back. I'm going to go sit like a little clear cut. And so I call you. I'm like, hey, dude, I'm walking back I'm going to walk back past where the truck was, a few hundred yards down the trail. And I'm just going to slip out to this other section and sit this clear cut. And I think at that point, had you already driven around to like? Oh no, yeah, you had already driven around. You were walking in. We parked the truck. You didn't drive off. We parked the truck, and you were walking past that clear cut to go to your scrape line.
Yeah.
And at that point, you're like, oh man, it'd probably be pretty good to sit the clear cut. And I asked you if it was going to mess you up because we'd be like 400 yards from each other. And you're like, no, it'd probably be fine. Then you said you'd already seen like a doe and a spike.
Yeah.
Or like some young buck walking in. I'm like, all right, cool. Well, I start walking, and all of a sudden, I get a call back from you.
So what was just dry open hardwoods the day before was now water too deep for me to cross with my boots, and I got those lacrosse what are they, Lagrange boots. I mean, those are like true knee boots. I mean, they come way up, and like I'm almost maxed out, and I'm like 4 feet off the bank. And this thing is probably 30 yards wide that I got to cross. So I'm like, yeah, no way. And, walking through like a little flooded, swampy bottom like that, there's always holes and stuff. Yeah. So I was like, I'm not going to try it because it's pretty cold that morning. And so, yeah, I back out. And I'm like, okay, that's when I called you back. I'm like, I'm just going to get in the truck and drive around and just go hunt where I hunted yesterday. Or at least go basically swing around and cross the road. I knew there was going to be water over the road, but I'm like, I'll just go cross over there and either hit the fire break or hunt where I hunted yesterday. So I go drive the truck over there, and I get to it, and where the water was coming over the road,
which there wasn't any the day before.
There was zero water the day before. Where it was coming over the road, it was like the sound of it was like, I mean, like it had some current, some serious current, which I figured out why in a little bit. And I was like, oh, I don't know. So I get out of the truck, and because you don't play with current like in that kind of situation. So I'm like, if it's just on the tires, no big deal. But if it's getting up to where it's hitting your door panel and there's current, like you just don't play with that. So I go walking out into it, and I don't get very far, and it's almost at the top of my boots. And the top of my boot is about your door on your Tundra. And so I was like, yeah, not happening. Not going to try it. So I back out, and I'm like, well, crap, what am I going to do now? So I go drive back past you. Okay, so I have to drive back through that original part where we had to drive through like 50 yards of water. When I'm driving back through it, like it feels deeper, like that water was up on the door. And there was current with that one too, but not as bad current. But it got up on the door. I was like, man, was it that deep before? Like, was I not paying attention? So I go up and around.
This is a couple days after it's rained.
Yeah. So, and I get up on the hill, and I go hunt a completely different spot. Not a lot of confidence in the spot. You could for sure kill a deer there. But it wasn't like what I had in mind. So then there's another way you can get into the pines. If you go all the way around on this road, there's a third way you can get in. So I went and tried to cross that. And again, what had happened is there's like a big bend in the creek right there, the creek that forms the boundary of our unit. And what had happened is where that bend starts, the river cut through that bend and was literally flowing through the middle of our unit. So all that current wasn't just spillage coming out of the swamp. It was where the river literally cut through there.
Yeah.
And this was probably every bit of 150 yards of water that you'd have to drive through, and it gets probably about thigh deep in the middle of it. So again, and good current coming through, not something you drive a truck.
You see
through.
a log floating across at a pretty good speed.
Very good rate of speed.
Yeah.
So not something I was like, nope, not happening. So at that point, it's like it's after daylight at this point. So I'm like, okay, now I come up with a whole new plan. At the original intersection that we had to drive through, the very first spot, you can either go straight or you can turn left, and the left turn goes to like a different food plot in a different area of our unit. So I was like, I'm just going to park there, and I'm just going to walk around. I think I can walk through that with my knee boots. And I was going to walk up into those woods somewhere and just hunt up in those woods and just kind of hunt on my feet until I found something good. And I pull back down to where that water was in the road, and I'm like, gosh dang, that looks like it's risen. So I get out of the truck, and I walk up to the edge of the water, and I kind of look around, and I grab a stick, and I jam it in the mud at the very edge of the water, because I'm like, I'm just going to go sit in the truck for a second and just see like if this is rising, because now I'm like, okay, is this still coming up? And I walk back to the truck, plug my phone in, look at it for a second, and I look back up. I mean, maybe 30 seconds has elapsed, maybe a minute. I look back up at the stick, and the water is literally 6 inches past that stick. And I was like, oh, my gosh. And so then I look back at my phone, pressed call Jacob, and I was like, hey, you should probably get down and get out, because you might get stuck. Because at this point, I've realized you were on an island. The river where we dropped you off, that was in the middle of where the river has cut through our unit. So you were on an island. And at this point, I'm like, okay, I don't know how high this is going to go. And, like, if you get stuck out there, you're stuck. I mean, like, there's no coming to get you unless we bring a boat in. And I don't know how long the water's going to stay up. So I called you. I'm like, hey, just get out. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, and it was like 7:45, 8 o'clock in the morning. And I didn't see anything that morning yet. Sitting in that little cut, and I was like, man, okay. Like, if you think the water's come up that much.
Were you pretty bummed?
Yeah, I was. I really was, because I felt very confident in that spot. And I'm like, all right, I'll start climbing down, and, started getting my stuff together, climb down the tree. It wasn't in that big of a rush. You're like, hey, dude, I'd get out. Like, the water's, coming up pretty high. And, like, I'm parked, like, past this little intersection way up here. The water's still coming up. And I'm like, okay, like, it can't be that bad. But you're like, just heads up, you're probably going to get wet walking across. Like, there's no way you're going to cross it in just knee boots. I'm like, okay. So I came up with a game plan and a formula for it. But anyways, got down the tree, packed all my stuff up. And when I was like, what I'm going to do, I'm like, man, I don't have another pair of pants with me in the truck. I don't have another pair of socks or anything. I'm just going to take my pants off. I'm going to take my base layers off. I'm just going to have my boxers on, take my socks off, and I'm just going to put my bare feet in my rubber boots, and we're just going to – I had an extra pair of boots in the truck, just not rubbers. They were some hikers. And I'm like, I'm just going to walk across it. Hopefully it ain't waist deep. That'd be uncomfortable. But, we'll just walk across it and just see how it goes. So I get over to the roadbed, finally got my stuff packed up. It's like 8:30 by this time. Get to the road, and I'm looking, and I'm like, dude, that water from like where we had parked the truck that morning. I got to where the truck was parked. The water is 40 yards from where the truck was parked. When we drove through it that morning, the water was 150 yards plus from the truck. Okay, and that's how much it came up in like 3 hours, if that.
Yeah. As I was waiting on you, it came up every bit of 20 feet and maybe 30
And when we say
minutes.
20 feet, not 20 feet like
Not
depth, but just like up, you know,
up the road.
yeah, up the road.
So what was dry ground is now all of a sudden halfway up my shin within a matter of 45 minutes.
Yeah. So I just start walking, and as I'm walking through this water, you know, it's like it's like up on my boot, above ankle deep, but it's not bad. But the current. So this is the weird thing. The water should be running across the road. The water's running up the road towards me, okay? And the way I described it for people is like if you've gone to the beach, okay, and you're 10, 15 yards off, you know, into the water, and that wave's crashing, and you're trying to walk towards the beach, but the water's coming back towards you, that's what it felt like walking down that roadbed. I thought, man, I'm moving a pretty good speed. And I looked down, and I'm going like 6 inches each step because I was trying not to like fall with all my gear on me. And ended up having to walk. I said it was 200 yards. It probably was further than 200 yards to the water.
I could hear you for a long way.
Yeah, just sloshing through it. And finally, after about 60, 80 yards, it's above the boot. Like I just got water coming into the boot. And now listen, I got these proprietary airlock calves. Okay,
Airlock.
so when I put rubber boots on with my calves, I'm talking about it's got a gasket seal on it. Okay,
Yep.
I'm talking about patent pending. You know, they as airtight, watertight as can be. It did not matter. That water's just like it's coming in.
How long were they submerged before water started
I'll
getting in?
I'll be honest. A little while, probably 30, 40 yards walking through it at a pretty slow pace.
Where your calf is so freaking big that these boots, it's so tight that water is not getting into the boot,
Yeah.
even though they're 100% submerged.
100% submerged. I'm telling you, patent pending. Okay, guys. If you want to know how to do that, go get you some fried chicken and start eating some fried chicken. Okay.
Go hit up Zaxby's
Yeah.
4 days a week.
Yeah, absolutely. So, anyway, so I just kept walking. I'm like, man, this water's getting, and then it's above my knee. It's like on my lower thigh. So I'm trying to hike these boxers up, turn them to a little more boxer briefs, you know, or just more of a brief action, not boxer briefs, but like a brief action. You know, I'm trying to,
Tidy whitey action.
yeah,
going
you know, I'm trying to hike them up and everything, and thankfully, you know, I'm not overly gifted, so I didn't have to worry about, you know, dunking
you went there.
dunking anything in the water.
Okay.
But
All right.
but man, dude, I got over there and there was one point I'm like, I'm about to get wet, son. Okay. And that water was cold. It was 38 degrees outside. And dude, we were just all up and tight. We were good, but God, man, I was just
High and tight.
I was like I had guns slung over my shoulder, backpack on, all my stuff on my backpack, had my clothes, my pants and socks and everything and base layers all wrapped up and attached to the top of the backpack. And I had, again, one hand kind of holding, you know, slinging my rifle. The other hand was like keeping them boxers up nice and tight as we were walking across. And Andrew could cut in some video from that. If not, y'all can go over to the Instagram story because I'm going to cut a reel out of, you know, me filming myself walking across them at a couple points. But
It's terrible.
but yeah, get across the water and I'm like, dude, at first, like, wasn't really in shock or anything. I mean, it was 38 degrees outside. The water wasn't that. I mean, the water was cold, but it wasn't like that cold. At least on my legs, you kind of got used to it after a little bit. But you know, boots are full of water. I get back and like where you had parked the truck was so much further up the road than I thought the truck was parked at, and I was like, holy!
And
crap.
I parked the truck like 30 feet from the edge of the water, and by the time you got there, the water was at the truck.
Yeah. And I was like, I'm like, this is going to be interesting. I'm like, we really need some chest waders, or at least hip waders. And, so that made it crazy. But, yeah, get back to the truck, and I'm like, man, this, you know, I got all my stuff, you know, all my stuff's dry. My boots are wet now, but I got other boots changing too. So I'm, like, back there trying to dry off and everything. And just, you know, sitting on the back of the tailgate, just kind of getting everything all situated. And next thing I know, so this road runs up through our unit. Next thing I know, I'm back there just like, you know, we're just talking, like trying to figure out, like, crap, well, what are we going to do? And I'm drying off. I'm using an extra pair of bibs I've got to dry off my legs and my feet and everything. And I look up the road, and I'm like, man, there's a freaking deer standing right there, like right on the road. Like, what is that deer doing? And I'm like, man, I tell Andrew, I'm like, hey, dude, come over here and shoot this doe. And he didn't hear me. And I like looked at him, I'm like, man, that's a freaking huge body doe. So I grab my binos, have my bino harness with me, like sit on the tailgate. So I take my binos out and look, and I'm like, Andrew, we got a shooter.
Well, before you said that, you said, Andrew, shoot that doe.
Yeah, well, it was.
You thought it was a doe, and you're like, Andrew, shoot that doe.
Well, it was up the road bed a good little ways, but
again,
also,
interior road bed.
Yeah.
We're allowed to shoot on it.
Yeah, so it's up the road bed a good little ways, but it's like in the shadows. It's like it's 8:45, 9 o'clock in the morning. The sun's casting pretty good shadow across the road. It's staying in the shadows, and I'm like, I can't see antlers or anything with my naked eye. But I just see like this outline of this body of this deer. I'm like, man, this is standing like
Big old front end on it.
yeah, and I'm like, man, that's the biggest doe I've ever seen down here.
Big chest.
Throw the binos up. I'm like, whoa! I'm like, get the gun. It's a good buck. It's a really good buck. And I'm looking at it, and he's just outside the ears. He's probably close. He's close to that 6-inch inside spread. And he's got really good time length. Probably just looking at him through the binos. 9.5, 10 inches at least on the G2s. Good, really good brow tines. You can see G3s, really good G3s. But I can't tell his main beam.
Oh yeah.
I'm like,
because he's looking.
He's broadside, looking right at us. And so like, if a deer is looking right at you, unless he's got these big swooping main beams, it's hard to get even if that's the case. I mean, you could probably make a decision like, oh, that deer's over 18-inch main beams. But this deer, the way his frame was, is like just outside the ears, and he like swooped up with his main beams kind of out in front. I just couldn't tell how long the main beams were. And
he was kind of borderline on the width. You said he was
he was right there. That 15, 16-inch inside spread. I mean, just outside the ears of these deer. But again, these deer are a little bit smaller, so it's not like you're killing a deer outside the ears up in the Midwest, which might be 17 inches inside spread. So I'm just looking. I'm like, dude, I think it's a shooter. So you grab my gun, but you didn't have ammo, so I had to go around I had to hop off the tailgate, run around, grab a couple shells. You pass me the gun. I load up, and I get around the side of the truck, and I'm like looking at him, and I'm using 8-power binos, and I'm like, I can see his frame. I just can't tell his main beam width or main beam length. So I cranked the scope up to 15 power, and I'm like just looking at him, and I'm like, man, he looks awesome. Like he reminds me of my second buck I killed in Alabama this year, just bigger.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But like a similar kind of frame of that second buck I killed. And I'm just like, I just need him to look either directly across the road or look away from us, just where I can see that main beam length and kind of get an idea. Well, I'm sitting there kind of propped up against the truck, and finally, and this has gone on for a couple minutes maybe.
Yeah, he's been standing there for a while.
Yeah.
I was sitting there leaning against the truck, and I was just laughing. I was like, this is stupid.
Yeah. And I'm like, dude.
I was like, what in the world?
And so I'm just looking, and I'm like, man, I don't want to shoot this deer unless I get a really good idea of his main beams. Finally, finally he turns kind of away from me a little bit and spins around to walk back across, back the same side he came in on. And I see his main beams. I'm like, 100% safety's off. And I had taken the safety off this deer like 2 or 3 times and put it back on.
Yeah.
Just to try and confirm. Well, he turns, and I see how long his main beams were. I'm like, clear shooter.
No brainer.
No brainer, 100%. And this is where a mistake was made. I never, I've killed deer out to 320 yards or something like that. I never go above like 9 power on a scope shooting a deer at any kind of distance like that. And one of the big reasons why, and if you shoot a lot of rifles, you'll kind of understand this. Even on a really solid arrest, the higher magnification you go to, the more those crosshairs move. Okay,
Yeah.
If you shoot a lower power, it's a lot easier to focus on the target and to center that crosshair, and the crosshairs, at least to your eye, aren't moving nearly as bad as if you're on like full power, whether you're on full 9 power, full 13, 14, 15. Again, we use these 15 power Vortex, the LHT razor scopes, which is a great optic. But when I had it turned up to 15 power, I'm kind of.
And you had it on 15 to see
what
him.
He was. To see him, because I'm looking into the shadows. And that's another thing we've talked about on the podcast. My second buck I killed this year, similar situation. He was at 10 yards from me, 10, 15 yards. And I had that scope backed all the way back out, of course, 3 power. But one reason why is because when you're looking, especially if you're looking, or even with binos, into like, you're in the sun and you're looking into like a dark, shaded area, especially in pines, it's very difficult to get a good observation of the deer, even if they're super close.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to get the best observation possible. Well, he turns, I get the gun on, and I'm like, I feel confident in the shot, and I'm taking the shot. Safety's off. He turns quartering away broadside, pull the trigger, boom. I shoot. He hits the ground, gets back up, and like goes back into the woods. At this time, by the way, I'm barefoot and in my underwear. Okay, because I was on the back of the tailgate trying to dry off, and this all happened. I'm in my boxers, barefoot, no pants on. Okay, and I look at Andrew. I'm like, did I just tag out in my underwear? Okay.
Oh my gosh.
So, it just crazy situation.
I know. I was just sitting over there chuckling. I'm like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Like,
what just happened? So we go. I finally get all dressed. I'm like, hey, let's give him a little bit of time. Not a huge rush to get up there and go look at kind of where he was at.
In the meantime, we range where he was standing.
Yeah.
And he was significantly further.
Yeah. So when I look at him, this long straightaway roadbed, and I was thinking, I don't know why I thought this. I had time to range him. I thought he was at 160 something yards. Okay. And partly to do with just this long straightaway roadbed. It like if you ever see something on like a narrow long straightaway, especially if it's flat, it's hard to kind of judge like this distance really quickly because everything kind of looks so similar. Like you start looking at trees and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Plus, these deer typically have pretty small bodies, and again, I was thinking I think he's a lot bigger body deer. Not like he's not a 200-pound deer, but I think he was a lot bigger than even some of the bucks we'd seen earlier in the hunt and then even last year.
Yeah, yeah.
So I see his body and it looks small, and I'm like, okay, well he ain't that far. It's all good. Well, my gun is point of impact. If I hold right behind the shoulder, mid body, point of impact is like 235 yards, something like that. Point of impact, like I'm going to be in the kill range roughly, maybe 240. And we ranged the spot he was staying at. It was 260 yards, 265 yards, like on the dot.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay. And I'm not terribly worried, but I'm like, might have hit him just a little bit low. Plus, like the whole crosshair situation. But we get everything ready. We start walking up there, and had my gun. Had you with me, and I'm like, let's ease up there. I'm looking. The second we get up to like, we're slipping down the edge of that roadbed, just real quiet, because I'm like, if he's not down, he's probably not far right in the wood line, and be able to get another shot and put him down if need be. Well, we get to like 40 yards from where I shoot him, and I'm like, we're taking our time. Like, we're walking, we're glassing, stopping real quick, glassing up through all these trees, just looking for the deer. Don't see him. And I'm like, the second I tell him, like, hey, dude, you look for blood. Like, when we get to that spot, you look down for blood. I'm keeping my eyes peeled through the woods and just seeing if I can see him. And not 30 seconds. You're like, well, there's blood right there. Yep. And there's blood right where you're standing. Decent blood, nothing crazy. And I'm like, okay, cool.
I wouldn't call it decent blood.
Well, hold on a second. Hold on a second. So, again, just for the situation, just a splattering of blood, okay? And again, I've had situations like that with a rifle. Get a little splattering of blood, and it kind of picks up even more so after that. Well, this was the opposite. So we find a splattering of blood. We look up.
Splattering of blood, the biggest speck of blood was about the size of like the eraser on a number 2 pencil.
Yeah, I was going to say probably a dime or something like that, but it's just like in this little area.
I don't even think as big as a dime. I mean, pretty small, but there was, several, like, a spattering of it.
Right there, yeah. And we look up, and I'm like, man, I don't see him. I mean, he ran. I had a pretty good point of travel where he kind of ran back up through. We go to this little log he jumped over, and there's a little piece of meat there. Mm-hmm. Never something you want to find, okay? Ever find meat, fat, anything like that, that's not
a great
that's
sign.
That's a direct indicator that more than likely, unless you hit super low, you hit, mid-bot, you hit them, behind the shoulder, lungs, anything like that. Unless it's lung material, but this was like meat, like actually a little piece of meat sitting there. I'm like, okay, that's not great. Mm-hmm. Keep slipping. It's like, this is not 5 yards from where the first blood is.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's like
we instantly lose blood.
Instantly. I mean,
no blood.
No blood.
So we start looking pretty, and when I saw that and the fact that it just didn't open up within that first 10 yards, I was like, okay, this isn't good. And then I was waiting for the order. I wasn't saying anything because like it's your deer, but I was sitting there waiting because I knew what you were about to say next. And then you were like, okay, I'm gonna keep. I think you said you loop that way, I'll loop this way. So like when I'm on a blood trail, what I like to do is, especially the more people you got, the better. But if it's like a 2-man team, I like for someone to stand at last blood, and if you're just really struggling to find blood, I want that person to not move until they see something that they can confirm that was that deer. Like they see the track, they pick up the track, they can move and look at that, or they see another spot of blood. But they literally hands and knees, like looking really close, really studying the ground. That person stays there. The other person loops around and does a little 50-yard circle and literally just does a loop and sees if they can pick it up. And the reason I like to do that is because, you know, sometimes depending on the hit, especially if you hit like kind of high lung, they might run 50 yards before it opens up.
Yeah.
So you got your insurance policy of your person staying on the blood, like right there at impact. But then the other person swings out. So if it does open up, you're not going to waste an hour tracking pin drops and partial tracks for 30 yards, and then all of a sudden it just opens up. But also they're not swinging so far ahead that if it's laying wounded up there, they're not going to bump it.
Yeah.
So that's what we did. We swung around and found pretty much nothing until the very, very end of the loop. I got to about where I thought it would be, and I find a little bitty piece of fat. I mean, fat, like congealed, salt, not like slippery, bloody fat, but like a piece of hard fat.
Yep.
And I'm like, man, that's not good.
Yep.
I mean, it's just like a little bitty piece. Again, not even the size of an eraser. I mean, very, very small piece of fat. And I whistled and you came over there and you were like, good job seeing that. Like it was very tiny.
Yeah.
And basically just to like save drawing this out.
Yeah.
That's essentially all we found. We ended up finding some, pin drops of blood. The period I put at the end of a sentence with this pin is larger than some of the spots of blood we found.
Yeah.
And then we found little bits of bone.
Yep.
And that's pretty much, I was going to say a death sentence, but the exact opposite of a death sentence on a deer track. Like that is the death sentence of your tracking job. In my experience tracking, I've tracked a lot of deer. When you find bone, your odds of finding that deer are pretty low.
Well, I'll preface something. So what that indicates is a lower leg hit. Okay, so we found some of the bone, and it's definitely from the lower leg. You know, below, you know, your leg, especially your front legs, is really it's three bones. But you have the lower leg, you have the shorter, almost like a, they're not really a femur, but the shorter bone that connects to the shoulder blade. And based off the blood, lack of blood, the fat, like kind of like tendon contents that we were finding in the bone fragments, to me indicates a lower leg hit. And on a lower leg hit, the only way you're going to recover that deer, and this kind of gets into our recovery aspect of this, is you have to have a team of dogs or a dog. In some states, this is not legal. So I'll preface this. You need a catch dog of some sorts. For you to track that deer on lead with a dog, you're just going to keep pushing the deer. You're never going to find that deer, okay? Especially if he's not bleeding out enough to actually, you know, be weak enough for you to actually, you know, get on him with a dog. So the only time I've ever seen a team of people, you know, recover a deer like this, again, a lower leg hit, is putting one or two dogs on, and you can only do this on private land, is at least in Alabama. Every other state's different on like their tracking regulations, but in Alabama you can track a deer off lead. Okay, you don't have to track it on lead when you're on private land. Public land, it's got to be on lead at all times. Well, this is public land, number one. So you would need a team of dogs, or at least one really good dog. It's a bang dog, catch dog, to go and pretty much bay that deer up for you to be able to get an opportunity at that deer to dispatch him. And there's also a very gray area there, whether or not you can actually dispatch him again with the dog.
Yeah.
I think if you talk to anybody from the state game wardens, like you're not allowed to dispatch the dog,
not
or not allowed to dispatch a deer.
Dispatch the dog. Hold on.
Yeah, dispatch the deer if there's a dog present.
So also just to preface this a little bit more, I used to work with a guy who was a big deer hunter, and he told me the story one time about how, and he showed me pictures and everything. He was hunting on a property he had permission on, and he had this big, I think it was a big 10-point or something that he was, but it like. He had a buck he was hunting. The buck came in. He's shooting like a 300 short mag. I think it was a close range shot.
I know the story.
And he hit it in the lower leg. He hit it basically on the elbow, like down there. Low leg hit. And he gets 10, 15 yards into the blood trail. Again, he's not really sure where he hit the deer. And he finds the deer's leg, okay? At the elbow, he blew the deer's leg off. And he is blood trailing the deer with its leg in his hand.
Yeah.
And like he's telling the story, he's a real funny guy, and man, him telling the story was just like it was hilarious. It's not funny, but it kind of is. He's like, I'm tracking a deer with its leg in my hand, and he ends up getting pictures of the deer later. The deer lived.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
I've seen plenty of 3-legged deer.
Well, we've had some at the farm, not from us shooting, but like neighbors. Like we just end up seeing like
something happens.
Yeah, 3-legged deer. Something happens, car accident,
They
something.
break it somehow.
Yep, and it falls off. But anyway, so long story short, that's the only way you'd be able to recover a lower leg hit if there's not like amount of blood being spilt that you can actually track. I have heard of guys talking about in some lower leg hits, especially if you hit higher up on the lower leg, almost like where that second bone starts, that is actually the bone that attaches to the scapula. There's a couple smaller arteries and veins there that you could push a deer enough to make him lose enough blood where he gets weak enough that maybe he just dies. Actually, that happened to Michael Pike 4 or 5 years ago on a deer where he hit it right there in that joint, kind of above the lower leg. And we tracked it. There was actually pretty good blood. There was easy enough blood to track, like fairly easy. And ended up, we think we bumped that deer. He brought in a guy with a dog the next day, and they found the deer dead at the second bed, which is after we had pushed him.
Yeah.
And, the tracker thought because we jumped him up, it kept that wound open. He bled out enough that when he went to that next bed, he couldn't recover and just died some point in the night, and they found him the next day.
Yeah, and you hear trackers talk about that a lot, especially with something like a one lung hit or just a weird hit that like a deer can survive, especially if you don't mess with them. And a lot of trackers will tell you, like, if it's a one lung hit, for instance, they'll say, hey, this is an instance where you might want to go in there and actually bump that deer.
Push him.
And basically you're that deer's bedded up, and that wound is clotting up and healing. And if you bump them and they blow that clot out, they're probably going to bleed out at that point. Obviously not an ideal situation. Nobody wants that. Not terrible. But like that's how you do it if you want to get that deer.
So going back to this kind of summarizing everything, there's no way, because we're on public land, number one. Number two, it's an SOA, and there's guys that have the unit right next to us. And if you run a deer, most of the guys I know, most of the team guys I know that run bang dogs, some people will call it a catch dog, off lead on private land. They're not just running that deer for a couple hundred yards. Like they may run it for 3/4 of a mile plus on that property before they actually, the deer actually either bleeds out or they can get to the deer. They can pull the dogs off, and then the hunter can go and dispatch it. There was no opportunity for that. Plus, with the river rise and everything else, it wasn't a good situation, because I'm like, if we push that deer, he's probably gonna hit the water. There's a lot of current in that water. Dog goes after in the water, the dog might drown and get caught up on a snag or something.
Yeah.
So at that point, we decided to pull off of it.
Yeah, and honestly, my view of that situation, because we were talking to some guys in camp, and they were like, well, we know some guys with some dogs, and I don't know, it wasn't my deer, so but I kind of feel like you felt this way. Like if that were my deer, with the hit, like the reality is the only way you're going to kill that deer is if you catch it or bay it with a dog and shoot it again. If you don't shoot it again, it will live.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like it might die, obviously. Like it's got a wound on it. It could get infected, stuff like that. But like it's not necessarily a mortal wound.
Yeah.
And so for it to be a sure thing, like that's the reality of your situation. And and if it was me, I wouldn't be overly interested in doing that.
No.
I wouldn't be interested in baying it up with a dog or whatever. And we towards the end of the blood trail, we kind of knew. I mean, because just the total amount of blood, I don't even know what to compare it to. The total amount of blood we found was minuscule.
Oh yeah, I mean,
like almost literally no blood at all.
Yeah,
less than 1/16 of an ounce of blood, probably. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, just no blood. And so, like, just for me, again, me personally, I just wouldn't be interested in hunting it with a dog at that point, and then shooting it again.
Well, but also I didn't want to put the dog handler's dog in jeopardy potentially of, again, if they chased out to the the river and everything.
Yeah.
And dog drowning, getting injured, something like that, plus ruining the guys that have the units next to us, because more than likely if he doesn't go to the river, he's not staying on our unit, he's going to be in someone else's unit, and I did not want that to happen at all either. So if it was a different situation, we had a lot more blood, even if we had some of the bone fragments, and I had more confidence thinking that we could either push that deer enough where he might not go that far, but he might bleed out and we can give him some more time and come back and recover him, we would try to do that. But in that circumstance, it's just unfortunately made a bad hit on him. And I was telling you this. I think that's the first. I've been thinking about this last week or so. I think that's the first deer I've lost with a rifle like that. Because typically, I've killed quite a few deer with a rifle. I've never had a situation like that come up, and just not had a recovery like that. Because I mean, feel very, very confident in shooting capabilities, equipment, all that kind of stuff. Is just the biggest thing that bit me in the butt was not having the mindset of, once I saw he was legal and he was well outside being, I mean, he's probably 125 inch deer looking at him, to have the mental capacity of turning the scope back down, and just getting a really steady shot to take the shot. And, if you get out of the shooting area, so be it. But it was kind of like, man,
I tried to force it.
I definitely try to force in that opportunity and try to make a shot. And, I've done that in the past and done well with it, but, that time just didn't make a great shot at all, unfortunately. But that was a really good lesson learned on something that I preach all the time, and I just did not implement it in that time because it happened so quickly. Once he did move, and I could tell he was good, he was beyond a legal deer. I always talk about shoot on a lower power. Like I practice shooting at 400 yards on like 5 power, 6 power, on my scope, and feel very confident doing so. When I have a good rest, and it was just one of those situations that that came to bite me in the butt big time, because I think if I would have had that turned down, I could have executed that shot very efficiently. If I would have done that. So just another really good lesson learned, and something that, again, we've talked about. We've put videos out on that before. Andrew had a good reel on that maybe a year or two ago. Talk about shooting even like on if you're hunting a power line or something, where you can shoot real far, keep that scope turned all the way down, because you don't know if that deer pops out real close. Or again, even if it pops out a couple hundred yards, you only got to turn it up just a little bit in order to still see the deer well, but not so zoomed in that crosshair's just going all over the place. So it's a really big deal. And even like when we've shot at the family farm, and again, shooting out to like 400 yards in steel plates, it's like when I shoot my setup, and then I get like Anthony or Christopher, one of my brothers to shoot, first thing they want to do is crank that bad boy all the way up. And I'm like, man, you're going to make yourself like regret that. And typically you do that and you miss a target.
Yeah.
And then turn back down and you're like, okay, well, it's a lot more stable, a lot more easy to kind of focus on and, execute the shot. So
well, it's part of my shot sequence too, is like I know that my scope lives on 3 power. It is always, always, always on 3 power. And it's part of my shot sequence. If I see one come out at 200 yards, that as I'm shouldering that rifle, I'm turning the scope to whatever I want it to be. Like, let's say I want it on 7 or something. Like, if it's out there, I'm just subconsciously doing that as I raise the gun, as opposed to if I have it on like 7 and I have one come out at 15 yards or less. If you don't have that muscle memory, or you don't have like that ritual, then all of a sudden now you're in a situation where you don't know what your scope's on. You try to get the deer in the scope. It's too much. Now you got to think about it. Now you're frazzled. You're kind of scrambled. You got to turn your scope down, and that just doesn't end well a lot of the time. It actually cost Colton a really nice buck in Kentucky last year. He had his scope turned all the way up to 9, and he couldn't get a shot off. Same exact thing happened to him. He shoulders his gun, crap, scope's up too high. By the time he's adjusting it and everything, and also, in my opinion, that drastically increases your chances of missing, is when you have a hiccup like that, and all of a sudden you're no longer in muscle memory, ritual, like kill mode. You're thinking about stuff, and it's screwed up, because like you talk about in turkey season, like shark eyes or whatever. That's what that is for me. Like when I see a deer, like I'm typically very focused, and I have a ritual that I do, and it just works for me, and it keeps me from getting fired up in the moment. And when I break that ritual, it doesn't end well. See SOA hunt circa 2023. That's exactly what happened. I broke that ritual, and I just whiffed on that deer. But if I don't break that ritual and I stay calm, I very, very rarely miss or make a bad shot, especially with a rifle. I'm working on that with a bow. I'm admittedly not as good with a bow.
100%.
Like with that ritual, and I'm still trying to develop that over the years. But with a rifle, man, it's dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
I got that ritual down. But that's my whole spiel on that. It's like have your ritual, have your muscle memory where when you see that deer, you're not even consciously thinking about it. You are automatically doing that stuff, and it's just it's your training, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's quote unquote your training, because what's the saying, like in a situation like that you don't like rise to your potential, you fall to your training.
Mm-hmm.
So if you train like that and you have that ritual, it's gonna carry you through situations like that.
And that's also one thing when we're talking about shooting. I know a lot of guys, because I was guilty of this, especially kind of growing up. You go sight your gun in, and you go to the range and you shoot it like on a lead sled.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you ain't putting no pressure on the gun. You're just sitting on that lead sled, and all you're doing is just pulling that trigger.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Make sure
For
the gun's
sighting
sighted.
in.
But when it comes to like shooting capability, the gun's always going to outshoot you.
Yeah.
Always. Okay. I have not ever met somebody that can outshoot a certain gun. Never. Okay. Sure, there's some people out there that are capable of that. That's one thing. Like when I sight in a gun, I may do the whole lead sled thing or shoot it on that bog tripod that I have. But like when I'm like getting ready to actually like shoot, it's like, okay, the bog tripod's, a pretty good example because it never holds it perfectly steady. The gun's always constantly moving, so it's not like rock solid as in like a lead sled would be. But like when I go to shoot, if we go shoot at the range, like I'll shoot off that bog pod or like sit down on the bench, whatever, and just like prop and hold the gun up and practice shooting like that and executing that, and also like going to the farm and shooting out of the saddle, which again this was on the ground, wasn't even on in the saddle or anything like that. But practice shooting from those situations just so you know like what it feels like. Because you may have a gun that you're like, man, this thing shoots great. But then when you get out there and it's like that awkward situation, you got to take, kind of like Mike a couple weeks ago, had to take a freehand standing up shot, no rest. And, it wasn't a far shot, 35, yards or so. But, you start taking that consideration in a situation. You're walking into a spot, after daylight or on an afternoon spot, that buck walks out at 100 yards. Are you capable of taking an offhand shot?
Yeah.
I try to practice that. It's not easy. It's definitely not easy, or especially a shot further than that. So, and I've seen guys that can take offhanded shots at 300 yards and actually hit a kill zone on a deer, 6-inch target at 300 yards offhand. I'm not that guy. Okay, not that guy one bit.
Not yet.
Yeah, not yet. We're
gonna practice.
We need an ammo sponsor, Hornady, if you're out there. Okay, and we'll go through a case of ammo, practice that, and do that more so. But anyways, this kind of comes back down to the capability and what you're comfortable with. So that was that whole situation. Ended up, because of the whole flooding and everything, we called, or I texted, I tried to call, but he didn't answer, but I texted the biologist that runs that property. And I was like, hey, man, we've got a situation here. Probably 65 or 70% of our unit we cannot access right now unless we had chest waders. And even with chest waders, it might get a little sketchy in some spots.
Yeah.
So I was like, hey, dude, is there any units that aren't being hunted where the hunters didn't show up, or again, it's units that are being kind of rested that we could get access to and go hunt? And he gave us access. There's 2 other units we could go to, completely other side of the SOA. We roll over there, start kind of checking stuff out. Looked pretty good. We, again, like we always do, drive around on all the road beds, looking at it. And this one sets up a lot different. This one didn't have a lot of interior roads.
Yeah.
It was like border roads where you had to drive around the units.
Which you cannot hunt.
Yeah, and hunting, going around those units, it was like a complete 180 habitat-wise.
Yeah.
Okay? It was still pines, but it looked completely different from the area we went to. And we started scouting. You went to one spot where it had a big food plot and a bunch of different habitat edges. I went to another spot, and I found some scrapes 10 yards from where I parked the truck, going down a fire break. It was some fresh tracks in it. But I wasn't seeing anything that really got me overly excited.
Yeah, me too. It was very depressing, actually.
Yeah,
walking through. I mean, the sign from where I shot my doe on that first afternoon, the sign was just non-comparable.
It's like you went from like super high deer numbers, which definitely the units that we had previously, where all this stuff had happened. We're like, it felt like there was a ton of deer down there.
Yeah, and
then we go up to like these other 2 units. There's a lot more, like a little bit more hill country, and it's just like there's a few tracks, few scrapes, did some big loops in there looking at some stuff. But like, I was like, there's way less deer on these 2 parcels just from the areas that we scouted. And again, it looks good on the map. again, we aren't trying to overcomplicate things. Trying to go into more obvious locations where you think there would be deer there, and there are some, but it was nothing like where we went to. So I think we made a decision. We can't cross the water, but we can hunt some of the higher ground. From like the access point.
Yeah.
And we're going to go back over there and check that out. And dude, we didn't drive back over there, and it wasn't, I think it was like 2:30 or something like that after we did this big scouting loop for a couple hours. And instantly there's like a little buck right on the road, right on our unit. He's just like crossing the road in our unit. And I'm like, man, they're here, dude. Like that water's pushed them up. Like we're going to get down there and go check it out. And I went to one spot, hunted on the backside of a little food plot.
And actually the spot you went to is where the buck that you wounded went straight to this pine thicket that you were hunting. And when we were tracking him, we very, very cautiously approached it. That was clearly his direction of travel. And we were looking at the map. I'm like, he's in that pine thicket. He's probably laid up.
Big pines, thick underneath.
And sometimes when they get wounded like that, they hit the feed pretty hard over the next couple days. And I was like, dude, again, we're not gonna like try to catch this deer with a dog or something like that. Not legal, can't do it. But I was like, we could probably hunt around him and maybe see him this afternoon. And so we actually went over there. You hunted that food plot. You got on the backside of the food plot where you could see down into the pines that he probably ran into.
Yep.
So we went back and hunted that area, and I was trying to hunt a little thermal hub that I was pretty excited about. And I go into that thermal hub, and I'll be danged if there wasn't like 5 feet of water in it. I mean, I'm like peeking over into it, and I mean, I could have caught a bass in there, dude.
Run some limb lines.
I was like, gosh.
Oh, I forgot to say that when I was walking back through in my boxers, just like trying to keep everything up high and tight. I was like, man, I could be running limb lines right now.
Yeah, dude, I'm telling you. So yeah, like I had to bounce. I called an audible. Ended up getting in a spot I wasn't overly thrilled about. Wind was terrible, and we basically. Long story short, we both saw like little bucks that evening that hung around for a long time.
Yeah, I had like probably a 2.5-year-old 7-point something come out. And dude, he came walking from, now listen, he came walking from I could see the water, from my tree. I had a little food plot next to me. It was one of the only 2 food plots on our units. And I wasn't really overly interested initially. The food plot, I was kind of watching back into the pine thicket. Like I was set up like looking into the pines, but the food plot was behind me. In that last 45 minutes, I hear on the other side of the food plot, which is right where the water is. I can see the water line. And this deer appears out of the water, like SEAL Team 6. He's soaking wet, dude. He swam that, okay?
Yeah.
And he comes out, and I'm like, man, he must be hungry.
And came out of the pines that we wanted to hunt originally. That's what's across that water.
Yeah. He came from that direction, yep. And he comes across this water, hundreds of yards of water, easily from the direction he came. And he pops out, and he starts feeding this food plot. And he's, again, nice rack buck, really pretty little 2-year-old, just feeding around the whole 9 yards. And dude, this is what I was talking about, like unpressured deer. My wind is blowing right into this food plot because again, if a doe came out, I was going to shoot a doe too on this hunt. But there, there's some pigs, maybe a buck who could, like a better buck could come through, and I was really trying to catch a buck, working the edge between the food plot and in this pine thicket, kind of like working through there. And he comes out in the pine. He comes out in the food plot. My wind is going right at him for 45 minutes. He gets as close as 45 yards from me. Okay.
Yeah, he don't care.
And he does not care one bit. And I'm waiting for him to blow at me. Like I'm kind of filming on my phone and stuff. I'm like, it's kind of cool. He stayed around till dark. Okay. And I stayed up in the tree a little bit longer because I didn't want to blow him out and all that kind of stuff. Knowing you probably would have and just like, hey, let him know
I'm out.
Well, it took me a little bit longer to get out of the tree, but. He finally eases out. I turn my light on, I climb out of the tree, and all this kind of stuff. You've been back at the truck for probably 30 minutes by the time I get out because you drove down to pick me up.
I had kind of a long walk out, so I walked straight back to the truck and then drove down to get you.
Yeah. But, anyways, but one thing I was going to mention, so this is like on day 2 of the hunt, and it's really a 4-day hunt. You get to hunt the first afternoon, you get to hunt the last morning. So
you get 3 full days.
3 full days of hunting. So
half day, full day, full day.
So this is the first full day. So we have one more full day after this, and then it's our half day. At this point, all I have seen is bucks. Not complaining, but all I've seen is bucks, and I'm like, there's a part of me inside. I'm like, why can't I see a doe? Because I wanted to shoot a doe too, man.
Oh yeah,
and
you lost sight of it.
And what was funny by the end of the hunt, dude, I'd seen a couple does, but it was 98% bucks.
Yeah.
2 shooters, which we're going to talk about the next one here.
And that where that buck came from came from those pines.
Yeah.
And so now that the area where they're at is essentially an island. The deer can cross it as that buck proved.
Yeah.
But that told us we're like, okay,
They're
they're
back
still
there.
over there.
Yeah.
And because there's those pines are a big high spot, and the water's cutting around it.
And we had the wild idea.
Well, so we looked at those other units. We're like, our original ones are so good. Let's drive home and get our chest waiter. It's a couple hours home.
Yeah.
We were staying down at like near this SOA, and we were like, you know what? It's worth the drive. Let's drive home. Let's get our chest waiters.
Come back.
And tomorrow, by God, we're wading that swamp if we have to.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did. Now, when I got to you, I had once again jammed a stick down in the mud to track the water level, and I'm like, we'll at least be able to see, this evening when I come pick you up, or tomorrow morning, what the water has done. And when I came to get you that evening, the water had considerably receded. So we're like, okay, it's dropping finally. And I walked out there. It was still too deep to cross, but I was like, you know what? I think it's going to drop tonight, but let's just go ahead and get the waders, because I'm not showing up here tomorrow and going to be kicking myself for not getting my waders and not being able to hunt that, because that's how good we think that is.
Yeah.
And so we drive home, get the waders, and head back out there. And now finally that next morning we get to hunt the spots that we had kind of anticipated hunting. I got to hunt the fire break. All those scrapes, every single one of them that I walked by was fresh open that morning.
After the waters receded.
After the waters receded, every single one of those suckers is wide open. New rubs, the whole 9 yards.
I was hunting the clear cut, which was probably 300-400 yards from you.
Yeah.
And same thing when I walked in. All the scrapes that were going down the little logger road next to the clear cut were all open. And so I got set up, you got set up. And I told you, we got set up early. Like, we got down there early because we were predicting that we would have to use the chest waders. Actually ended up not having to use the chest waders. We could drive across it back again.
Yep.
And so we get up. This is the first hunt that we've had where I'm up well before legal.
Yeah,
okay?
me too.
Like, nice and comfortable, like in the dark. And I text you, I'm like, hey, dude, it was like, I think legal was like 6:20, but it was overcast. And it was like 6:15. I'm like, dude, in 10 minutes, you better start, like, calling, do some grunting. Because we're kind of like we're on that upper swing of the rut. Like, there's probably a couple does maybe starting to come in the heat. The bucks are really cruising. They're covering a lot of ground. And I'm like, I'd start calling. And 10 minutes went by. I did my first grunt sequence, 10 and grunt sequence, which I've had a lot of success this year calling in bucks. And I'm telling you, not 5 minutes later, I hear coming through that clear cut right in front of me, just the like kind of like a crashing, loud walking noise.
Mm-hmm.
And I look down at 60 yards coming through that clear cut. It's this 3.5-year-old. I think he might bite another 7 point. Not legal, but a really nice bodied deer. He comes on a beeline right towards me, hits the edge of the wood line that I'm in, and I'm a couple trees back. He swings around, gets into the wood line, and I try to film this, and I didn't get my phone out in time. He starts. First of all, he opens the scrape up and just starts thrashing this tree with his antlers, just making all kinds of racket. Okay, and he's like making all this commotion. I try to film. By the time I started filming him on my phone, he had already got done with that. And he started slipping around me. He worked a couple more scrapes and walked past me. As he gets 30 yards behind me, I look back out in front of me, and I'm like, "Here's another buck coming." And there's another buck coming. I'm talking about on a straight line, right across the clear cut. And he is, by the time I see him, he's 30 yards off the edge of the tree line.
Yeah.
Now I see him, and he's a little bit better deer. And when I first saw him, he almost got me to grab the gun. And there's another really nice 3-year-old deer, 7 point. He made the inside spread, but he wasn't short main beams. Main beams might have been 16, 17 inches maybe.
Borderline buck.
Borderline. I mean, still even small mass, just a deer. If he makes it a couple more years, will be a hammer.
But like as far as just straight legality,
Yeah.
he's a borderline buck.
No, he's definitely smaller than a borderline buck. But like,
okay.
But like, he's just one of those deer that when you first glance at him, you're like, he might be legal, and then you look at him, you're like, okay, he's not legal. Not kind of like that first deer you saw. Okay,
yeah.
But he's wider. That deer. Inside spread wise was fine. He just had, again, shorter main beams, short tines. You can tell he's an immature buck.
Yeah.
He comes in exact same thing. He comes all the way up, and he gets to like 20 yards from me. He's about to walk down. He smells where that other buck hit the tree line. He's about to walk down the same way, and I hear running behind me, and I'm like, oh,
it's on.
I'm like, oh God, okay. So I like spin around, grab the gun, Made sure my scope was already on 3-power, but I double checked, spun around, and just on the other side of the fire break, I catch movement. I hear like 2 things running, and I'm like, oh my god, it's going down. And then I look at them, and I'm like, it's freaking pigs. 2 hogs, 2 probably like, I don't know, 60-pound, 50, 60-pound pigs. They come tearing by me, and they're making all kinds of racket, just running. And I was going to try to shoot. I was tempted to shoot one, but they were running through some thick stuff. Couldn't get a shot. I'm not worried about pressing something. Well, that 3-year-old in front of me didn't want nothing to do with that. He kind of looked over there. He couldn't see him, but he could hear him running. And he kind of bounds back out into the clear cut a couple hundred yards. And he just starts, for the next hour and a half, he's just walking back and forth in that clear cut. Just like, and this clear cut's beautiful, dude. Like when you're on the ground, you can't really see out into it. It's like, 6 foot tall, like this stemmy plant. I don't know what kind of plant species that is. But when you climb up, it almost looks barren. Like when you climb up, like it's very open. But on the ground, it's pretty dense. And I can just see him out there, and the sun comes up. I can see his antlers out there, and he's just kind of milling around. I'm just waiting for like a big buck to show up. Then I see a doe pop up, and she's like 220 yards out in this cut. And I see the body, and I see how big the body is. I'm like, man, it's a freaking buck. That's a good buck. Throw the binos up, and I'm looking at it through the binos, and all of a sudden it picks his head up, no antlers. I'm like, that is the biggest body doe I've ever seen on this place. And I'm like, I texted you, I was like, hey, I got a doe out here. And I'm like,
I'm expecting a shot any moment.
I know, but like it's kind of like in your situation. She's way, way, way out there in that stuff. Again, probably could take a shot, but I'm like, let's see if she gets a little bit closer. If she does, great. We'll get a shot opportunity. If she doesn't, no big deal. I've got some bait out there because, I got, doe. Probably the next 6-7 days she's going to be coming to heat. But might want to be checking her. So I'm like, I'm leaving her out there. She's my little bait, okay?
Yep.
And
live decoy.
She beds back down. That 3-year-old comes back around. He comes back next to me. And then all of a sudden I hear he kind of disappears. I've been doing calling sequences. Again, these same 10 grunt calling sequences, 8-10 grunts in a row. And all of a sudden I hear just thrashing. There's like a sapling thicket right down the tree line from me. I just hear thrashing, dude. Okay. And I'm like, it's 40 yards from me, 50 yards max. And I can just hear it. I can't see what's moving. I'm like standing up, and I'm like looking, I'm like in the saddle, and I like squat down to kind of look underneath everything. I can't see anything. I do a couple soft grunts. And when I'd grunt, it'd stop for a second and just go back to thrashing. And then I'm like, man, he might be a little pissed off. Let's snort wheeze at this bad boy. But I'm not going to snort wheeze right at him because he's so close. It may be too much. I'm going to snort wheeze like kind of back on the other side of the tree. So I snort wheeze on the other side of the tree. It stops. It gets quiet for like 10 minutes. I'm like, he's thinking about it. Okay? He's thinking about it. Yeah. And I don't give him anything else. I just leave it at that. And what I wanted to do, this is the same situation Thomas, my brother, had 2 months or a month and a half ago. Mm-hmm. Same situation, had a buck come in. He grunted. He didn't know how big the buck was. He did a grunt sequence. Buck responded to him, grunting again. And then he snort wheezed at the buck. And the buck was kind of hanging out in some real thick stuff. He snort wheezed at the buck. And he was able to reach over and grab a limb that had a bunch of leaves on, like a beech tree, and just started Thomas started just thrashing that tree.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what got the buck to seal the deal, come all the way in to 25 yards, and was able to get a shot. And it was a really nice deer. Well, I'm trying to do that. I'm looking around. I'm like, crap. Like, I got a couple branches around, but there's no leaves on it. So I'm like trying to shake it a little bit, and it doesn't sound right. I'm like, crap, that doesn't sound right. So I like sit there. All of a sudden, I can hear that deer walking again. Never shows up. At one time I saw something move, and I just could not lay eyes on like exactly what the deer looked like, and he just kind of eased back kind of towards your direction.
Yeah.
Well, at some point you text me, and you had a observation of a good deer.
Yeah, I was hunting like on that fire break. How I ended up setting up is I got in a tree where I could see down the fire break a little bit, but it was so it's such a skinny fire break, and there's so many saplings on the edge that you really couldn't see very far down it. But there was like an extra lane cut out of these pines in this one spot. And so this lane like goes up through these pines and then kind of bulbs out. I don't know if it was like a logging pad or what. So I'm watching that interior edge where it's basically just a patch of thicker cover. And on that first afternoon when I walked through there, that fire break had a bunch of scrapes on it. But I swung out into those pines. And when I swung out into those pines, I found a really nice scrape out in the pines. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about, what was the guy's name from Oklahoma?
Tory, something Roy.
Tyrell. Roy, we interviewed him a couple weeks ago. He's from Oklahoma, and he hunts flatland, and he was talking about how, we were asking about pinch points. And he said it's not really a pinch point, but again, it's kind of like almost like a focal point. That scrape, you got all this flat land, the deer can walk anywhere, but they might swing within 50, 60 yards of that scrape when they have the option to just walk everywhere. So I'm like, okay, there's a focal point. I got that scrape over here to my right. I've got this interior edge to my left. This spot's got a lot going for it. And again, this is one day post-flood. This is our last full day. I climb up, and there's quite a bit of water in here.
Yep.
Lots of standing water, which is not a huge deal to me. Like, I know these deer will walk through that water. I just don't know if they're going to, like, feed in it. And I was kind of excited about the feed aspect of this spot. There's a lot of green stuff in there. I'll cut in a video of where I was sitting. So you can see like what it looks like from the tree versus on the ground. Again, in the tree, you can see really good through there. The problem with hunting a spot like this is that it's all good. Like a deer could literally be anywhere in that. And it's pretty complicated cover, like look at. So while it's really good, it's also actually a very challenging spot to hunt because of that. You cannot be on your phone, period. You can't be on your phone. You can't be freaking looking at birds. Like you have to be scanning the entire time because the odds of you hearing a deer before you see it in a spot like this, especially when everything's wet, is pretty low.
Yep.
And so I'm like, I don't think I'm going to hear anything in here unless it like is making a ton of noise. And those hogs came past you. I got the hardwoods to my back. There's still some flooded timber back there where I tried to cross it the morning before, and I had to turn around and go get in the truck. I hear those hogs hit that water. And, I mean, it just sounded like they were having a little pool party. I mean, dude, they are so loud. I was like, I'm about to kill one of these suckers. Because I was looking for a hog. I wanted to diversify the freezer a little bit. And if one of them came by, I was gonna sling some lead. And sure enough, I get turned around. I get ready. And I hear them for a long time. Finally, they come across. I see these two little black things running through the woods. And I get some decently clear windows, but I'm thinking they're going to come right to me, so I'm not really getting up on the gun yet. And one thing about hogs is they freaking run everywhere. They like never sit still, and they're just running around going crazy. And they come down and they cross the fire break, and they cross the fire break just beyond where I can shoot to, and they get in the pines. And I'm looking, I can see really good where they're going to. And they just never emerge out of it. So I think they might have bedded right there because about an hour later, I saw something move like off through the pines in that direction. And I throw my binos up on it, and where the movement was at about like 90 yards. And I'm looking at it, and I can't find anything there. But as I'm looking through my binos, I catch something further back through the pines, and I see an antler come up through the woods. I'm like, oh crap, there's a buck. This buck's at like 210 yards or so. And I'm looking at him through my binos, and he is like a sure enough borderline buck. He's a little bit bigger than my Arkansas deer this year. He's like on the main beam, like he's definitely a little short on the main beam, but the width, he's like right there. But he's not the kind of deer you want to shoot. Like if you get an SOA hunt, that is not the buck you want to shoot. Because it's not worth if he's 15 3/4 inches wide.
Yeah.
You know, like that whole situation I talked about earlier in the podcast. So
no doubt deer is what you're looking for.
yeah, and his G3 was like a little bit longer, or G2 was a little bit longer than this pin probably.
Oh, so yeah, it was.
Yeah, like he was a decent little deer, but like he not what you go to an SOA for. So borderline buck, he went in your direction. I was thinking he could have been the deer that was thrashed in the tree that you couldn't see. Because of like the timeline and where he was, like he was heading right for that spot. So he came through. I didn't see anything else. The problem was, and you run into this especially the further you are away from like a decent weather station, the bigger of a problem this is, and that is like the true accuracy of a wind direction. If I'm hunting a property, like let's say in Shelby County, Alabama, pretty close to Birmingham, pretty populated area, my weather apps are pretty much dead on. Now, of course, like the wind can swirl and it can come like ricochet off hills and stuff. But like on my club, there's one hill and it's like the tallest hill in the area, so there's no obstruction. And I always go up there before I go hunt as like a proof of wind direction. So if they say north wind, I'm going to that hill, I'm throwing some milkweed or something out and confirming like, yep, north wind, cool. So it's accurate. On this place, on really any SOA, you're pretty far away from any major population center.
Yeah.
And so therefore you're probably pretty far away from the nearest weather center. So they're getting that weather by like guesstimating between two weather stations, and the wind that morning started out as like pretty east, a little bit of east southeast, and to hunt the spot where I killed the doe, I needed more of like a south wind, because the east southeast is blowing out where I saw almost all of the deer. Again, maybe you could get away with it on this SOA, but I'm just like, I don't know. I'm nervous about doing that, because at this point in the hunt, I'm really nervous about wasting a hunt.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna wait until the wind switches, and then I'm gonna go over there and ease into that spot. Because at that point, I've kind of written off where I'm hunting that morning. That's another thing on this place. There's so many deer that if you're not seeing deer, you just need to move, because they're out there and they're moving somewhere. So I was like, okay, I need to move. And it gets on up into the morning, and that wind shift is just not happening. Absolutely not happening. So I ended up calling some audibles. I went and checked some different spots. Just nothing really worked out. I was kind of confused on what I wanted to do for the rest of the day.
Yep, because it was your last day.
Yeah, that was my last. So Friday was our last day, and or the last day of the hunt. And a family friend had a death in the family earlier in the week, and they planned the funeral for Friday, and I was not gonna miss that funeral. So I was like, I can't hunt Friday. Like, I'm just gonna leave Thursday night. I'm gonna make sure I'm ready for that, and I'm gonna show up for them. And so this was my last day, and I end up scouting around. You end up getting down out of your tree, and you were kind of in the same mindset. We're like, crap, because the apps were saying the wind was going to switch to south, but it was not doing that. The apps are saying, like, one of mine was saying southwest, another one was saying south, and it is like east southeast, but like very, very eastern wind, which is not good for like any of the spots I had planned.
Yep.
So then what did you do after everything kind of simmered down that morning?
Yeah, so that called that 3-year-old 7-point, called him back in later in the morning. He made a big circle around me, second buck to get, really third buck to get directly down with me, and never cared. And after that, I decided, I think I got out of the tree around noon or so.
Yep.
Or close to it, after not seeing anything for a little while. And I think what we had talked about, I decided to go to a different section of the public, or of our units, where there was an old fallow field. More than likely, it's a green field, but it's more than likely it was an old fallow field. Probably didn't plant it. Kind of next to the creek, next to this little pine thicket. And I'm like, man, if there's deer in that pine thicket, which there clearly was, because we can drive through that pine thicket, like 6-year-old pines. And there's like rubs all down the road bed. There's tracks crossing, trails crossing. And I'm like, if we get this weird east southeast wind, even though that's not what the apps were saying, I could get down there, swing around the backside of this pine thicket, and maybe catch some does, but really catch a buck kind of cruising the back edge of that pine thicket, scent checking. And that's an area that the guys that we shared camp with last year, one of the guys killed a buck back there in a similar location on the backside of that pine thicket next to the creek. So that's where I decided to go. Went back in there, and
That's not where he killed the buck. He killed it where you hunted the very first afternoon.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, I was so confused. Anyway,
This might have colored your judgment a little bit.
No,
right?
I mean, not necessarily, because when I went back in there, I was walking the fire break logging road right next to the pine thicket, and there were scrapes everywhere. The biggest scrapes I've seen on the property were all up and down that fire break. A lot of them had been worked. The trails just piling out of this pine thicket, and kind of going out. There's water oaks all next to the creek, and they're coming out, and you can tell they're feeding in that area. Probably a bunch of does, some bucks too, of course. I got to that fallow field, and I'm like, dude, this looks so good. It's just, chest high, just broom sedge grass growing up in it. And like the edge of the pine thicket tapers off. Like the pines go from 6-year-old pines, 12, 13 feet tall maybe. And they kind of taper down to just like high stem count saplings for like the last 30, 40 yards before it gets to that field. Mm-hmm. And across the field is like big pines, like real big pines. And I'm like, dude, this looks good. Like you got a bunch of these edges all come together just in one spot. I'm going to climb right here. Climbed up. You originally were going to come hunt next to me, and then you decided to bounce and go to a different section. And at I got set up at 3 o'clock. At 3:30, I hear something walking, like sticks breaking and stuff on the other side of that little fallow field in those big pines. I'm like, it's got to be a deer. It might be a pig, but it's got to be a deer. and I catch some movement, catch some stuff moving. I throw the binos up, and all I see like brown, like a brown leg and a brown back of a deer, and I see antlers, and like I'm like freaking buck. And he's working right on the edge, like just off the side of the field, just in the edge of those big pines. And when I see him just for a split second, and I see his main beams had pretty good time length, longer than that buck you're talking about. Probably like his G2 is probably 8 inches or something like that. But his beams, at least his right beam, looked really good. Like his beams kind of like swooped out. He was more than likely probably made that antler restriction, width-wise, over 16 inches. But also his main beam length looked pretty good. But I only saw him for a split second. I groaned at him, did a snort wheeze, never showed back up. He was just kind of easing on.
Heartbreak.
Yeah, so ended up sitting there for the rest of the day, had some piglets, some shoats.
Yep.
Come working through, making all kinds of racket. And I'm like, I'm not about to shoot one of these.
Should have smacked one
of these freaking gerbil-looking, pigs running around. Looked like I had to just go to the pet store and go grab Pepper some food, and they had some guinea pigs in there. I'm like, those piglets are a little bit bigger than those guinea pigs.
Dude, you fit them on the grill hole, man.
Yeah, shoot them with that rifle and blow them in half. Yeah, no. But I was hoping maybe Mama would come working through, but ended up not seeing any other deer. But it just kind of goes back to like, I saw so many bucks on this hunt, and it came to that last day, and again, you had to leave. I had to go back to the camp and everything, hang out with Tommy and Randy. I kept calling. So Tommy was telling me, like me and Tommy were texting back and forth, and I was that real big deer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That I told you about that deer, right?
Oh yeah.
Well, Randy didn't kill it. Some loggers hit it with the truck.
What?
Did I show you that photo? That deer's dead.
Really?
Yeah.
That the big one?
Yeah.
No, are you serious?
Yep.
Dude, do you see where Zach and them sent that? Someone from the I won't like say the name, but like someone from the high up in the DNR has a picture of that deer. No, are you serious? Oh no, man.
So I thought he killed it. No, the guys hit it.
That's a bummer. With a logging truck?
Right across the road from Tommy's place.
Oh my gosh. What? Oh, dude. I wonder if they're going to get to put a tape on that deer.
I asked him, I'm like, so did the truckers claim it, or did Randy get it? And Tommy didn't like clarify, but he said it seemed a little fishy with the truckers.
Yeah, I don't know.
So anyway,
freaking shot that sucker out the window of the skidder, I bet.
Yeah. So anyway,
man, oh my gosh, that's a giant deer. I guess we're not going to show a picture of it. It's not ours to show, but dude, Booner. I mean, huge.
He won't net Booner, but gross.
Nets are for fish, my man.
Yeah, he's in that. I told him when I saw that deer, he had photos of it. I'm like, that deer's in the low 170s probably.
Yeah,
pretty easily.
Giant.
And you see him in person, and he's every bit that big. Anyway, but so we were talking about all kinds of stuff at camp, and I was talking to Tommy a whole bunch. He's like, man, if it was me. Because I was kind of bouncing between a couple spots, and I was thinking about, again, sitting in one of those interior road beds on the place and just watching one of those road beds. And he's like, dude, if it was me, that's where I'd be. He's like, everybody I know. He's like, if you're successful, he's like, if you want to be successful in the rut, you go sit a road bed.
Well, so that actually factors into like that last afternoon I was there when you hunted that spot. You called me and you said, hey, there's a bunch of sign over here. There's another spot similar that you can go work into and hunt the backside of this pine thicket with me. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to do that. I was fired up about it. And then when I worked in there, I was like, this is me talking myself into a spot that I would maybe hunt on most of the WMAs that we hunt.
Yeah.
But I'm like, here on this SOA, I don't think this makes sense because like you can't see far. You're watching into really dense cover, and you're very limited on where you can actually see that deer and it's going to take some luck. And so I was like, I just need to get somewhere where I can see really good. So I go back to the clear cut you hunted that morning, and I stop there, and I get out, and I'm like, if the wind is still east, I'm going to hunt this cut. If it's more south, I'm going to go hunt where I shot the doe. Drop some milkweed, straight east wind. So I was like, okay. I went and hunted that clear cut because I was like, I just need to get somewhere where I can see really far. And when I was driving to it on one of those border roads, what comes out of our unit but a nice shooter. Crosses the road right in front of me, stops, looks at the truck. He was like a 5-point, but he was a nice deer. Like as a 5-point, he was.
Now, when you say 5-point, what was the antler structure look like?
Like he should have had more points. Like I don't know if he was broken off, but I couldn't get my binos in time to like really look at it. He's only like 50 yards, but he had a nice G2, and I think he might have just had that G2 on that one side.
So main beam G2 on one side.
Main beam and G2, and then he had like a nice 3-point side on the other side. But as that kind of deer, like that antler structure, like to me, he was like probably more impressive than my 10-point from last year. Just the mass he carried and everything. He was a really good deer. Walked off our unit into a different unit, and I was like, crap. And this was at like 3 o'clock, and I'm like kind of, because I've been scouting around and scrambling, and so I'm like, okay, they're moving, and this just proves again, we can't hunt that road bed.
Yeah.
But it's the kind of spot I need to hunt. So I'm like, I'm just going to go get where I can see. So I shoot up that clear cut, hunt over there, do some calling, rattle really hard, trying to make something happen. Ended up just seeing a doe. That's the last thing I saw. So I went back to camp, hung out with you guys for a little while, and then peeled out and had to head home.
Yeah. So after talking to Tommy, I was like, okay, yeah, I'm definitely going to sit in one of those road beds. You were telling me to go sit because the wind was still like kind of iffy about like what was going on, and we had more rain coming in, and you're like, man, you ought to go all out and go sit over there where I shot that doe at. And I'm like, maybe. I'm like, there's this other road bed that I was really interested in sitting in, so I went to the other road bed that morning. Got set up, and it was like it was supposed to storm really bad that day, like bad thunderstorms, potentially tornadoes, the whole 9 yards. And I'm like, because of that, I'm like, I'm not gonna climb a tree for one reason, because I don't want to be there, and then all of a sudden I see this big old funnel cloud coming. Because like you don't have much. I don't have much cell signal.
You better hang on, boy.
Yeah, I don't have much cell signal while I'm down there. So I'm like, if I'm going out, I'm going out in my truck. Okay, but me and the old honey tunny going out together. Okay, she had daggum freaking tank. Okay.
Yep.
So I'm like, I'm gonna sit somewhere where I can pull the truck up, kind of pull it around a bend in the road, and then I'm just gonna sit there on the road, get my chair, get my tripod, everything set up, go sit this one spot. Had a pig come out at like 160 yards, shot it.
So you're hunting like 7 feet from the truck at this point. Like ultimate lazy hunter.
Yeah. And anyways, shot this pig, and then like, dude,
just to clarify again, like you're parking where like a bend in the road, like where your truck's hidden, and then you're just like getting on that bend and watching a straightaway.
Pretty much, like the truck's like, I toss a rock, the truck's right here.
Gotcha.
And anyways, so this pig comes across, shoot the pig at like 160 yards. It runs through some thick little hellhole. I'm sitting there. I'm like, all right, I'm going to wait a little bit. Like, I'm not too worried about going to track it right now. Let's see what else comes through. And I shot the pig pretty early. It was probably like 6:45 in the morning, probably before 7. And like right at 7:15, I see this big old black cloud coming. And I'm like, this is going to suck. And all of a sudden, just bottom falls out. I'm like, all right, I'm going to go hop in the truck for a second. Let me go hop in the truck. After this little, because it was like a lot of bands of rain. After it stops, I'm going to hop back out, and then we're going to walk down there. Because it was raining. It was so windy. I'm like, I'm not just sitting out here. I got rain gear, but I'm not just going to sit out here in this crap when it's like coming sideways. So I get in the truck, 10 minutes, rain stops. I hop back out. I'm like, let me go look for that pig. I walk down there, and of course, right where it's standing at, because that rain came through, I'm looking for tracks where it's standing. Because I was talking to Randy, and he was like, a lot of times you shoot a pig, you may have blood. But a lot of times you don't have blood for like a good little ways, and then he might have only went 50, 60 yards. You might not find anything. And those guys that shot that real big boar, same situation. There was no blood. We just had to start walking that
They're
direction.
so fat. It like that fat, I guess, clogs it up. Like they just don't bleed a lot.
Yeah.
Bears are the same way.
So I walked, unless you hit them with a 50 cal muzzleloader. They bleed pretty good in that case. I have personal experience. But I go up there to where within probably 5 yards of where we're standing, and I can't see any tracks. The ground's real soft, but it just rained everything over, so I can't see any fresh tracks. I don't see any blood, so I'm like, he went right in here, like, and it's like thick briar and stuff. Like, it can't be that bad. I start walking in there. I spend like 30 minutes just doing like figure eights and that stuff, and I can't find anything. No blood, nothing. So I ended up pulling out of that, and I'm like, before this next rain band comes, I'm going to move spots and go to a different location and see. Like, really just go over there where you're talking about trying to go. Park the truck, slip around the edge of that road, and then set up in that road bed and watch. Well, I drive over there after looking for that pig. I drive over there, and I'm talking slower, like going as slow as possible, and I got a little lazy. More rain came in, and it wasn't as bad a rain, but it was raining pretty good. I mean, you had windshield wipers going. And I'm like, man, I'm just going to, like, instead of like parking right here and walking around this bend, I'm just gonna like ease around the bend in the truck, and then maybe like park the truck off the side of the road, and then just kind of like again set up right in front of the truck. I do that.
So instead of walking 100 yards, you're like, no,
50 yards. Maybe.
Instead of walking 50 yards, I'm going to drive the truck 45 extra yards and then get out.
Yeah. And I do
Golly,
that.
man.
So I do that.
Oh.
I do that. And this road bends around, and it's a straightaway going right to Andrew's Street that's like probably 180 yards long. Okay. Yep. I come around that, and I'm talking about, dude, I'm barely moving. And I come around, and all of a sudden I stop, and I'm like, what is that in the road? And I just see like this
my God.
This deer in the road, when it's got his head down, kind of in this grass, and I throw like in this like sagebrush. I throw my binos up, and what do I see? Dude, I look, and it's the biggest 8-point I've ever seen in Alabama. It's a legit, like, we went at Tommy's, and I was like giving him some rough scores on some of the deer they had, and I was always within about 5-6 inches of deer. And I looked at this deer, and I'm like, and most of the time I was like low on all the deer. Yeah. And I look at this deer, I'm like, it's a 140-inch 8-point standing there at 160 yards. Like legit 160 range. Like I had time after the fact to range the spot. And I look up and I'm like, oh my, and dude, he's just got these gigantic sweeping main beams. I mean, his antlers looked like this, and just, G2s, 11.5, 12 inches. He had mass, kind of like that deer you're talking about, just mass that carried out through the whole main beams, threw up each tine, just a heavy set deer. And he had a big body on him, but his body wasn't crazy huge, but you could just tell by his frame. I mean, main beams came out past his nose, sweeping main beams, big G2s, big G3s, big brow tines. And I'm like, God. Dude. So I stop, truck's on, and I'm like, I've got to get to the back seat, grab my rifle, slip out, and ease up the edge of the road, because he's right on the edge of so he's like, he's like right. So that road bed goes straight. Like it comes around this bend, it goes straight, and it kind of cocks back to the right a little bit, and he's right there, like right where it starts, cooking, turning back a little bit. So I'm like, man, I can get out, grab the gun, I can slip down this edge, and get a shot.
So you're like gonna go put a stalk on him?
100%.
Oh my,
100%.
Oh my.
And dude, I get that door open, I get out of the truck, I get to the back seat, I go to open the door, and I look up, and he's looking right at me. I'm like, dang it.
You couldn't even back up. Oh my god!
That never crossed my mind.
Freaking road hunter! God, you're so lazy.
Never crossed my mind.
Gosh!
And so he bounds. He bounds out. He bounds into these pines, and I'm like, and it's windy as crap, dude. Wind is howling, and the wind's kind of quartering across my face. Kind of just quartering across my face, across the road. I'm like, let me get the gun. He's probably not going to run terribly far. Let me ease up there. Let me like walk up in there, and just see. He went right into that sapling thicket. I mean, went right into that sapling thicket. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna ease up there, and I'm like, he's big enough. If he has his head up, I should be able to see him in this stuff, okay, and be able to get a shot at him. So I go slipping up. I don't get 10 yards from the truck, and a doe busts out right next to me.
I bet she scared the crap out of you.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Because I'm like, that's not him. But I'm like, what is that? And the doe runs out, and I'm like, I ain't shooting a doe right now. She stops at like 40 yards, looks back at me.
Oh my god!
And I'm like, I don't care nothing about you at this point. So I go walking up there, and slip up to that spot, get all the way up to the spot where he went in. I'm like binos. I'm easing up in there, and I don't see anything. And I can only see, again, like maybe 40 yards like out into that stuff. And if he had his head down and he was kind of hunched down, I wouldn't be able to see him. So I'm like, I want to back up like 60, 80 yards. And then I'm going to, because the wind was kind of cutting. When I was walking down the road towards where he was at, the wind's cutting across my face. So at some point, he's going to be able to smell me, especially if he swings around. So I'm like, I'm going to hightail it back, get like 80 yards back towards the truck, cut into the woods, and try to swing into the wind, or swing with the wind kind of coming across the back of my head into the spot that I think he was going to kind of go into, and see if I can get him. I get in there, dude, and I start hearing stuff breaking, like sticks, like not like he's running, but like sticks popping. Yeah, and it's right there in front of me. It's like right off my left side, like crosswind to me, and I'm like, I get up on this log, dude. And I'm like looking, and I'm just like got my binos up looking for him. I cannot lay eyes on this dude, but you can hear him just moving around through all that brush. And that pretty much wraps it up.
Oh my!
At that point, there was nothing else I could do. I could keep walking further, but it was so, even with the wind, it was so loud walking through all those briars. I'm like, I can't keep pursuing this deer and trying to get a shot opportunity because he was getting in thicker and thicker and thicker stuff.
If it was even him, right?
Yeah, and more than likely, again, you saw like 11 deer, 10, 12, 18,
Yeah, I mean,
50,
man,
75,000 deer in that spot.
So many deer in there.
It could have been a different deer. But anyways, I swung back to the truck, and that was pretty much it. I only had like an hour left to hunt. And, again, sat on the road beds in the rain. Nothing ever showed. But, yeah, just to see a deer like that, especially in Alabama. And, like, again, I've gone to Iowa, and that deer would have been bigger than my Iowa buck. So it's like to see a deer like that in Alabama. I mean, frame-wise, because he was just an 8-point. Your 11-point that you had that situation with last year on the same place.
9-point.
9 point. What did I say?
11.
I keep saying 11. Why do I keep
that? See, I'm telling you, he freaking adds. Look, other people's deer, he'll undershoot it by 2 or 3 inches. If it's his deer or like one of our deer, he's overshooting it big time.
I don't know why, because we went back. But anyways, no matter what, he could be a 14-point. He was still at 135, 140 range, I still think. And even looking at it, like I asked both Tommy and Jason Jason. Randy didn't say that here. Actually, maybe Randy did, but Jason, both of them were like, it's in that range. Like, he's in that, probably in that low 140 range.
Yeah.
This year was an 8-point. That was, I mean, dude, his frame was intense. That's the only way I could describe it. And I'm like, God, dude.
Lord.
So, it was a cool opportunity, but I'll say this, like, we got to look a little curse going on at that place.
Honestly.
Like, there's like we've had success there. It ended up, we didn't kill any bucks on this hunt. You killed your one doe. And again, I think I saw 2 does the whole hunt. Mostly it was whole bucks, which is awesome. But it's like there's a little curse there. It's like both times we've gone, we've like had opportunities, missed deer. Again, I wounded a buck, had another opportunity at a big deer, and just couldn't make it happen. Yeah. And it's like, but it kind of shows you, one thing that this place kind of shows me, and like I think a lot of the other SOAs, because we've had other buddies draw other SOAs and had similar experiences, just like seeing really, really good deer of just what is possible in the state, especially like if you're a private landowner and like you could have some of this property and manage it this certain way. It doesn't even have to be that big of a property. As long as you're in a decent neighborhood, dude, you could have some unbelievable hunting.
Yeah, no, for sure. And one thing that this hunt reinforced for me is you just have to be decisive about stuff. Like, I think that was probably the biggest thing that burned us on this hunt. And part of it wasn't really our fault because of the flood and everything. I knew what I wanted to do, and when that plan A got dashed, I didn't really have a good plan B. And so basically for the rest of the hunt, we were just scrambling around trying to, figure something out. And then that last day, like, instead of being decisive and going in there and doing what you probably knew you should have done, it cost you an opportunity at that deer, straight up. Even just, parking your truck, I mean, just 50 yards back, man, it would have made all the difference in the world. So like I think that's important, just, regularly, just wherever you hunt, but especially on an SOA like that, don't overthink it and be decisive. Don't do weird stuff. Don't try, don't think yourself into a really complicated situation. Like, hey, you got thick pines, there's tons of browse in them. You saw 10 deer the first time you hunted it. Hunt there, like that. That's it.
Yeah.
And you really don't need anything else. Like, don't overthink it. Don't overcomplicate it. Like that's why I didn't set that little spot on the backside of the pines. I'm like, okay, I'm thinking way too hard about this. I'm trying to force a scenario in my head where it's like, well, if they do that and they come through here and the wind is doing this,
you don't worry about it.
And there's all these factors. It's like, no, go sit where you can see through good cover really far. And that's really all there is to it.
Yep.
And,
I told a listener who, drew, a unit down there, I was like, man, like, he had a couple really good interior roads on his place, like, just whether some of them were like big logging roads or actually like access roads just for him on that parcel. I'm like, I would seriously like either find you a tree to climb right there or to sit on the ground and like have you a tripod, something that you can put your gun in so you don't have to freehand shoot. And like watch that, and then there's a couple really good looking cuts on that parcel right next to those road beds. Which is going to be also point of travel coming across. But I'm like, if he could climb, I told him this, on the edge of the road bed, and on like one of those clear cuts came right up next to that road bed. If you could climb a tree, if there was a tree to climb, and he said he had a saddle or he had a climber, so I'm like, he might not be able to find a tree there. But if you could sit right where you could watch down that roadbed and still see out into that clear cut, you could not ask for a better spot, especially a rut hunt on a place like this.
Yes, 100%. That's what I told guys too who were hunting the same area. I had a couple guys message me. I was like, "Hey, dude, don't overthink it. Hunt the roadbed, hunt the field. Whatever you got to do. Get where you can see 200 yards.
Yeah,
and I mean that's really."
Or 400 yards.
Or 400. I mean, that's really all there is to it.
Yeah, so because some of the roads on these places, some interior roads have a lot of bends in them, so like you can't see past 60 yards. But some of them, all these interior roads, like they are super long straightaways, and I'm like, God, if you could sit one of those. The hardest part about that is again, and I was telling Tommy this is one reason why I didn't want to set a roadbed, is that deer comes out so quickly. You have all these antler point restrictions. It's hard. You can tell main beam length.
Yeah.
When they're coming through broadside. It's hard to tell inside the spread, but you get a good visual of the body, but it happens so quickly. You got to be able to stop that deer on a dime and be able to make a decision very quickly whether or not it's a legal buck to shoot.
Yeah, see, you brought that up early in the hunt, and that is a good point, but also my perspective has changed on these SOAs, and for me personally, going down there, now this could obviously change if I draw it, and by the time I get there, I'm having a pretty bad season, but like, man, if you can hold out for it, and you go to one of these SOAs, like, I don't think there's any reason for you to shoot a deer below like 135, because
whoa, you're setting the bar pretty damn high.
Well, no, I'm for real though. We've been there 2 years in a row, okay, and both years we've seen a deer of that caliber.
Do you think all SOAs are that caliber?
I think that probably everyone knows probably the top three. I think all three of the top three. I'm not going to name them, but if you're familiar, you probably already know what they are. All three of those, I would hold to that standard. If you can hold it out, because like, look, you can go in there and you could shoot, the legal 8-point, and if you're happy with him, do it. But if you can hold out, dude, they are giant. Mark my words, it is only a matter of time before a Boone and Crockett deer gets killed on one of them. It's only a matter of time.
Net or gross?
Net. I'll say net.
Okay.
It's only a matter of time because they haven't had them for that long,
Yeah.
and they're doing so much work on them. And that deer that, got run over, he was all over that SOA, dude.
Oh, yeah.
One of our listeners that we ran into at the SOA had that deer on camera.
Yep.
And, got run over. That deer would have been a Boone and Crockett deer that got, again, you can go into nets and deductions and all this. If you want to say like a Buckmaster score, 170-inch deer all day long.
Yeah.
It's only a matter of time before someone actually kills one on one of these places. So that being said, like, dude, like if you are hunting a roadbed and you're worried about that, like, again, just don't shoot the borderline buck. Like that buck that you saw, if he was crossing the road, you would instantly know that's a shooter.
Yeah.
Like the 10-point that I shot last year. When I saw that deer, I instantly knew he was a shooter. I didn't have to put binos on him. I didn't have to look at him through the scope. I immediately knew he was a shooter. So like that's the kind of deer that you're looking for, just an absolute no-brainer because they're out there, and if you can hold out for it, you're gonna find one. Like, don't shoot a borderline buck. But anyways, we're 2 hours into this, so we're gonna make this a Monday episode.
Yeah.
So we'll hit some Q&As on this Thursday's episode. All of our cameras are dying, so we're going to wrap this thing up. You got anything else, Jacob?
No, but just appreciate everybody's been listening for this far into the episode. Appreciate everybody's been purchasing all the hats as well, especially the new, it's back in stock, old school camo hat. Again, I really appreciate everybody purchasing those, and appreciate everybody that's already been entered to come to our Hunters Meetup event, second annual Hunters Meetup at Weaver's Meat Processing in Hartselle, Alabama. There is an event show page on our Facebook page. You can go over there. Again, it has all the intel for you, so you can go check it out. Again, appreciate everybody watching. Appreciate everybody listening to the podcast. And remember, guys, we'll catch you back on the next episode from Southern Outdoorsman, and y'all stay Southern.